You're watching Noir Lane. I'm your host, David. Remember, every story hides a secret, and every shadow hides a clue. Tell us what part of the world you're watching from. Subscribe and hit the like button. Join us in the mystery, and let's dive into the story. Chapter 1. If you want to understand Nero Wolfe's relationship with his orchids, do not picture a hobby. Picture a religion with rules, hours, and a private chapel on the top floor of a brownstone on West 35th Street, where the congregation is made of plants that never argue, never plead, and never pretend they did not hear you. They do, however, demand fidelity. At 7:10 that morning, I was in the office on the second floor, doing what I do best when the city has not yet thrown a brick through the day. I was sorting the mail and trying to decide whether one of the envelopes was an invitation or a threat. With rich people, the difference is often only the paper. Wolfe was behind his desk with a book, his glasses balanced, his expression fixed in that look of patient contempt he wears when nothing is happening and he wants it to stay that way. Fritz was in the kitchen, conducting whatever quiet miracles kept Wolfe's appetite satisfied and my own mostly intact. The house itself was calm, which is the first sign you should worry because calm is never a guarantee here. Only a pause between catastrophes. The bell rang. I went down, opened the front door, and found Theodore Horstman on the stoop. If you do not know Theodore, he is Wolfe's orchid man, and calling him that is like calling the Statue of Liberty a lamp. Theodore is thin, precise, and carries seriousness like a coat. He wears it even in August. This morning he wore it in January, which made it more justified, but no more comfortable. He stepped inside without waiting for my greeting and said, "Archie." "Theodore," I said. "You are early. Wolfe will either be pleased or furious." Theodore's eyes were too wide for either. "Something is wrong." "What kind of wrong?" I asked. "The wrong kind," he said, and pushed past me toward the stairs. That was enough. I followed him up, and by the time we reached the second floor landing, Wolfe had already emerged from the office doorway, drawn by the sound of Theodore's footsteps. Wolfe does not like surprises, but he recognizes them. "Theodore," Wolfe said, voice heavy. "Why are you running in my house?" Theodore stopped, straightened, and tried for composure. Summonham was in the orchid room. Wolfe did not move. His eyes narrowed slightly, the way they do when something has dared to touch what he considers his. He did not ask whether anything was missing. He did not ask whether there had been damage. He simply said, "Explain." Theodore swallowed. "The door was locked, as always. The lock is intact. There is no sign of forced entry. The windows are secured. The thermostat is correct. The humidity is correct. The benches are aligned. The pots are arranged precisely." I blinked. That sounds like a good report. Theodore's gaze flicked to me with irritation. "It is too good." Wolfe's eyes hardened. "Continue." Theodore's voice tightened. The watering can was returned to its place. The tools were wiped. The hoses were coiled properly. The labels are all facing forward. The ledger book was open to the page I use, and then closed again. Wolfe's mouth tightened. "You did not close it." "No," Theodore said. "I never close it until I finish writing." Wolfe's face changed then. It was not anger yet. It was something colder. Anger is for clumsy insults. This was for sacrilege, he said. "Someone entered my orchid room at night, disturbed it, and then attempted to erase their disturbance by making it perfect." Theodore nodded. "Yes," I said. "Maybe they were an enthusiast, a midnight gardener with manners." Wolfe looked at me as if deciding whether to swat me or ignore me. He chose the latter, which meant he was worried. He turned to Theodore. "Nothing is missing." Theodore shook his head. "Nothing I can see." Wolfe's eyes narrowed further. "That is not reassuring. That is calculated." Wolfe moved toward the stairs with a speed that for him counts as urgency. Theodore followed, and I followed both, because it is my job, and because my curiosity has always been a stronger motivator than my common sense. On the third floor, The orchid room door stood at the end of the hall like a vault. Theodore produced his key, unlocked it, and opened the door. The air inside was warm and damp, the familiar controlled jungle smell of bark, moss, and bloom. The lights were on their proper timer, the benches were aligned. The plants sat as if they had been posed for a photograph. It was, as Theodore had said, too perfect. If you have ever walked into a room where a child has been told to clean quickly, you know the look. Everything is in place. But you can feel the panic that arranged it. Here there was no panic. There was intention. Wolf stood in the doorway, immense and still, and took in the room with eyes that missed nothing and forgave less. He walked slowly down the central aisle, breathing the air as if it were his own property, which he would argue it was. Theodore hovered near the potting bench. I stayed back, because I have learned that when Wolf is in that room, he does not want conversation. He wants reality to confess. Wolf stopped at the ledger book on the bench. He touched it with one finger, then opened it. The page was blank where Theodore's morning notes should have been. The pen lay beside it, aligned neatly with the edge of the paper. Wolf's voice was quiet. "They touched your pen." Theodore's face tightened. "Yes." Wolf's eyes moved. He walked to a bench where a row of cattleyas sat in various stages of bloom. He leaned slightly, peered at a label, and then moved to the next. He did not touch anything at first. Wolf avoids touching when he can observe. Touching is for confirmation. At the third pot, he stopped and placed 2 fingers gently on the rim. He lifted the pot slightly, shifted it a fraction of an inch, and then set it down. Theodore inhaled sharply. "Mr. Wolf." Wolf did not look up. This pot was moved. Theodore's eyes widened. "How can you tell?" Wolf's voice was dry. "Because I am not a fool. The mark on the bench does not match the pot's base. It was returned carefully, but not precisely." Theodore looked at the bench, then nodded slowly, chastened. Wolf moved again, deeper into the room, and stopped at a plant near the far wall. Its bloom was pale, elegant, almost translucent. The kind of flower that looks as if it should not exist in a city that smells like exhaust. Wolf's gaze narrowed. "Theodore," he said. Theodore stepped closer. "Yes." "Where did you obtain this specimen?" Theodore blinked. "That one, from the Van Doren shipment. Last month." Wolf's eyes remained fixed. "You documented it?" "Yes," Theodore said quickly. "It is in the ledger." Wolf turned his head slowly toward the potting bench, the ledger that was opened and closed by someone else. Theodore's mouth tightened. "Yes." Wolf leaned closer to the bloom, not touching it, just studying. Then he straightened and looked at me. "Archie." "Yes." "Summonen came here for leverage," Wolf said. I frowned. "Leverage in the orchid room." Wolf's eyes were cold. "They did not steal a plant. They did not vandalize. They arranged, they erased. That is not theft. That is a message." "What message?" I asked. Wolf's voice was calm. "I can enter your cathedral. I can touch what you worship. I can do it without leaving mud." Theodore's face had gone pale. For Theodore, this was not a threat. "It was a violation," I said. "Maybe it was just a clever burglar." Wolf looked at me with contempt. "A burglar does not tidy. A burglar does not close a ledger. A burglar does not attempt to improve order. This was not done for profit. It was done for control." He turned back to the plant and said, "Theodore, did you notice any petals missing from this bloom?" Theodore leaned closer, eyes sharp. "Number, it is intact." Wolf nodded slowly, which was not reassurance. It was calculation. We went downstairs because Wolf had seen enough to be angry, and anger in Wolf requires beer and a chair. He returned to his office, sat and accepted a glass of beer from Fritz without asking. Fritz's eyes took in Theodore's face and then Wolf's posture, and he did not ask questions. "Fritz has always known that questions are sometimes an insult," Wolf said to Theodore. "You will change the lock." Theodore swallowed. "Yes," Wolf continued. You will inventory every specimen. You will compare the inventory to your records, not the ledger page that was disturbed. You will observe for any changes in temperature, humidity, or placement. If you find anything, you will report to me at once." Theodore nodded, then hesitated. "Mr. Wolf, how did they get in?" Wolf's eyes were cold. "That is what we will learn. Go." Theodore left. Fritz vanished back into the kitchen, the only place in the world that seemed safe from other people's schemes. I sat at my desk and waited for Wolf to speak, because when Wolf is quiet like that, the words are assembling. After a minute he said, "Archie, you will telephone Inspector Kramer." I blinked. "About the Orchid room?" "No," Wolf said. "About what will happen next. Threats do not arrive alone." I had just reached for the phone when it rang. I answered. "Nero Wolf's office." The voice was a man's, tight and urgent. "Is this Archie Goodwin?" "That depends," I said, "because I never learn." "This is Lieutenant Malloy, Midtown Homicide," the voice said. "We have a situation downtown. A man has been murdered. Inspector Kramer is on his way. He asked me to inform Mr. Wolf." I froze. Why would Kramer inform Wolf about a downtown murder? There was a pause. Then Malloy said, "Because of what we found." "What did you find?" I asked. Malloy's voice tightened. "An orchid petal." I felt my stomach drop. "An orchid petal." "Yes," Malloy said. "On the body on the lapel, and a note in the victim's pocket, with an address, West 35th Street. I looked at Wolf. Wolf was watching me. Expression unreadable. I said into the phone, "Give me the address and name." Malloy gave it. When I hung up, Wolf said, "Well, a man named Calvin Rourke," I told him. "Found dead in his office downtown, and on him, an orchid petal." Wolf's eyes narrowed. Only one," I said, "and a note with our street address, not the number, just the street." Wolf leaned back slightly. "Crude but effective. You think it's connected to last night?" I said. Wolf's voice was calm. "Yes. The intruder entered my orchid room to show me they could. The murder is to show me they will." I stared. "You're saying they killed a man to threaten you?" Wolf's eyes were cold. "Not necessarily. They may have killed him for another reason. But they used my orchid to connect the corpse to my house. That is leverage." "Why you?" I asked. Wolf's mouth tightened. "Because someone wants something from me that I would refuse if asked politely." I stood up. "We're going downtown." Wolf glared. "You are going downtown." "Fine," I said. "You'll sit here and commune with your cathedral while I step into the city's sewer." Wolf's eyes remained cold. "Yes, and you will bring me facts, not impressions, facts." I grabbed my coat. As I reached the door, Wolf added, "Archie." I paused. "Yes." Wolf's voice was quiet. "Do not assume the petal is what it seems." I frowned. "It's a petal." Wolf's eyes narrowed. "It is a statement. Statements can lie." I went down the stairs with the uneasy feeling that I was stepping into a case that had already begun before I knew it existed. Outside, New York was cold and loud and indifferent, the way it always is when someone has just been murdered. As I hailed a cab, my phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. No greeting, no name, just one sentence tell. "Wolf, his orchids are not the only thing that can be arranged to look perfect." Chapter 2, the fastest way to learn you have been drafted into a melodrama is to have the police call you by your full name. Midtown Homicide had sent me to a downtown office address that sounded respectable in the way a dentist's waiting room sounds respectable. It was in a building with a lobby that smelled of wax and impatience, and a night guard who looked relieved to hand me off to someone official. Up on the 9th floor, 2 uniforms and 1 detective were keeping the curious out and the nervous in. Lieutenant Malloy met me at the door, coat collar up, face set in the expression men wear when they are standing too close to a death they did not plan for. "Goodwin," he said, and nodded toward the interior. "He's in there," I said, "alive or dead." Malloy did not smile. "Dead." The office was modest but careful, no mahogany, No gold pens, no pictures of yachts, just a desk, a chair, filing cabinets, and the faint odor of coffee that had gone cold hours earlier. The man on the floor looked like a man who had never expected to be on a floor. He was on his back, jacket open, tie loosened, eyes half-lidded, with the blankness that makes every expression look like surprise. A forensic tech was crouched near the body, gloved hands moving with small professional efficiency. A detective I did not know was taking notes and trying not to breathe too deeply, Malloy pointed. On the lapel. There it was, a single orchid petal, pale green, almost translucent, perched on the dark fabric like a whisper, trying to look innocent. I have seen blood, I have seen bullets. A petal should not have bothered me. It did anyway. Not because of the flower, because of what it meant someone wanted Wolf to believe. I leaned closer, careful not to cross the invisible boundary that makes cops twitchy. The petal was narrow and delicate, a slip of color that would look like nothing to anyone who did not spend time in Wolf's house, staring at plants as if they were evidence. Malloy said, "You recognize it." "I recognize trouble," I said. "This is a very specific kind." He nodded. We found a note in his pocket. West 35th Street. No number. "That's not subtle," I said. Malloy's eyes narrowed. "We don't get subtle much." "Then you're overdue," I told him. "What's the official name?" The detective with the notes answered without looking up. "Calvin Rourke. That's on his driver's license. That's on the lease. That's the name on the business paperwork." I studied the body again. Neat hands, trimmed nails, no grease under them. He looked like a man who filed reports, not crates. "What did he do?" I asked. "Office manager," the detective said. "Some kind of storage outfit, warehouse leases, inventory audits. Boring." "Boring men get murdered too," I said. "How?" Malloy nodded toward the medical examiner's preliminary sheet. "One shot close range, no sign of a struggle. Whoever did it came in easy." "Like someone in Wolf's orchid room," I muttered. Malloy's gaze sharpened. "That's why Kramer called you. He wants Wolf to be kept in the loop, or kept out of it. With him it can be hard to tell." I stood upright. "Can I take the petal?" Malloy shook his head. "Tech already bagged it." "Then I need to see it bagged," I said. "And I need a clear photo. If Wolf says it came from his orchid room, he'll want to know which plant. If he says it didn't, he'll want to know who wanted it to look like it did." Malloy watched me for a moment, then nodded. "I'll have copies sent to you," I said. "Send them to Wolf's office. My desk is just the staging area." On the way out, I paused in the hall and looked back through the half-open door at the body. A single petal had attached our house to a man's death, the way a signature attaches a person to a check. The question was whether the signature was genuine or forged. That question followed me all the way back uptown. Wolf was in his office when I returned, sitting behind his desk as if he had never moved in his life and resented the suggestion that he might. Fritz had laid a late lunch on the side table and Wolf had touched it, only enough to prove he remembered food exists. That told me he was focused. I had barely shut the front door when Saul Panzer arrived. Saul looks like a man who could blend into a crowd until you realize the crowd has been standing slightly straighter since he joined it. He came in, removed his hat, and nodded at me as if I were a colleague rather than a clerk, which is one of Saul's nicest habits. "Archie," Saul said. Then he looked past me toward Wolf's office doorway. "He's in." I followed Saul into the office. Wolf's eyes lifted, took in Saul, took in me, and then settled on my face. "Well," Wolf said. I went to my desk, set down my coat, and said, "Downtown murder, one shot clean petal on the lapel. Note in his pocket with our street. The name on his papers is Calvin Rourke." Wolf's mouth tightened slightly at the last part, not because he disliked the name, but because he disliked how tidy it sounded. Saul spoke then, calm as always. "The name is not Calvin Rourke." Wolf's eyes narrowed. "Explain." Saul placed a small notebook on Wolf's desk. "The man is Grant Hale, warehouse foreman, not an office manager. He has used the name Calvin Rourke for business transactions. He has been doing it for 2 years. I blinked. Warehouse foreman with tidy hands. Saul nodded. He was careful. Tidy hands, messy friends. He dealt with people who prefer nicknames and cash. He kept his work clean by using a second name. Wolf's gaze sharpened. "Where did you obtain this?" Saul said. "A friend at the dockmaster's office and a friend at the Union Hall. Hale had debts. Archie, he also had favors. His alias was used on warehouse leases and on shipping paperwork. He kept his fingerprints off the mess by keeping his name off the paper." Wolf sat very still for a moment, then said, "Interesting." I said, "So the police have the wrong name. They have the name on the body," Saul replied. "That is what they will use until forced otherwise." Wolf's tone was dry. "Then we will force them," I added. "And the petal, I saw it pale green." Wolf's eyes narrowed further. "Pale green." "Yes," I said. "Not white, not purple. Pale green, like that new bloom Theodore has been fussing over. That petal," Wolf said slowly, "should not exist outside this house." I leaned back in my chair. "That's what I thought." Wolf looked at Saul. "How soon did you identify him?" "An hour," Saul said. "He is not famous. He is simply known in the right places." Wolf nodded once. "And those places?" Saul's face remained neutral. "Warehouses, freight handlers, men who move things quietly, men who keep their hands tidy while their friends get dirty." Wolf's eyes narrowed. "So our murdered man moved things?" Saul nodded. "Not personally. He arranged movement." Wolf took a slow sip of beer, as if tasting the logic, and someone arranged his death. At that moment, the doorbell rang. I went down, opened the door, and found Inspector Kramer on the stoop, looking like winter had chewed him, and decided he was too tough to swallow. He came in, shook off cold air, and glared at me as if the whole city's crime rate were my personal hobby. "Where is he?" Kramer growled. "In his office," I said. "Where he always is, because it's nailed down." Kramer stomped up the stairs. I followed because it's safer to keep the inspector within sight. He entered Wolf's office, saw Saul, and frowned. "Panzer," Kramer said. "Of course." Saul nodded politely. "Inspector." Kramer looked at Wolf. "All right, Wolf. What is this nonsense? Orchid break, in flower petal, dead man downtown. You're telling me somebody's staging a play?" Wolf regarded him. "If it is a play, Inspector, it is poorly written, but it is certainly staged." Kramer grunted. "The Orchid room. No forced entry. No mud. No stolen plants. That's not a burglary. That's theatrics." Wolf's eyes were cold. "It is an intrusion." Kramer waved a hand. "Sure, a nut loves orchids and wants your attention. Then there's a murder, and somebody drops a petal like a calling card. Too neat." Wolf's voice was calm. "Yes, too neat is the point. It is not meant to convince you. It is meant to irritate me." Kramer glared. "Why?" Wolf looked at him as if the answer were obvious. "Leverage." Kramer snorted. "Over what?" "Your plants." Wolf's eyes narrowed. "Over my choices. Someone wishes to force my participation in a matter. They began by demonstrating access to what I value most. Then they connected my house to a homicide with a petal that should not exist outside my orchid room." Kramer said. "You assume it came from your orchid room." Wolf's voice stayed flat. "I assume nothing. I observe probability. The petal is pale green. Such petals are not common in commercial bouquets. The kind likely to adhere to fabric is from a specific species, one that Theodore has recently acquired." Kramer's eyes narrowed. "So the killer had your petal." Wolf's gaze sharpened. "Or someone wants the killer to appear to have my petal." Kramer opened his mouth, closed it, then growled. "Fine, I'll bite. Who's the stiff?" I said. "Police paperwork, says Calvin Rourke. Saul says the real name is Grant Hale." Kramer's head snapped toward Saul. "Grant Hale." Saul nodded. "Warehouse foreman, alias used for leases and shipping paperwork." Kramer's face tightened. "That changes the picture." Wolf leaned back slightly. Indeed. Kramer stared at Wolf. You think the Orchid Room stunt and the murder are connected? Wolf's voice was calm. The timing indicates a deliberate sequence. The intruder visits first, the murder follows, like a signature written after the check is cashed. Kramer's eyes narrowed. Meaning, Wolf said. Someone used my house to mark the murder. That is either a distraction or a message, or both. Hale's death served the sender's purpose, regardless of the sender's role in the killing. Kramer scowled. That's a nice way of saying you're not sure. Wolf's eyes were cold. It is a precise way of saying, I refuse to guess. Kramer turned to me. Goodwin, did you see anything on the body besides the petal? Just the petal and the note, I said. One shot, clean. Kramer's mouth tightened. A clean job means professional or lucky. Wolf's gaze stayed steady. Or someone with access and preparation, as in my Orchid Room. Kramer grunted. You're enjoying this. Wolf's tone was dry. Enjoyment is not my concern. My concern is that someone has entered my sanctuary and then used a piece of it to drag my name toward blood. Kramer stood abruptly. All right, you want to play, Wolf. You play, but don't interfere with my investigation. Wolf's eyes narrowed. Inspector, my house has been invaded. That is already interference. Kramer scowled at Saul. Panzer, keep your nose clean. Saul nodded. Always. Kramer left with the kind of exit that suggests he wished the stairs were steeper, so he could punish them for existing. When the door closed, Wolf sat still for a moment, then said, Archie, yes. You will go to the warehouse foreman's world, Wolf said. You will discover what he was moving, for whom, and why he required an alias. You will determine whether the petal is genuine or planted. I sighed. And if it's planted? Wolf's eyes were cold. Then you will learn who owns the lie. Saul spoke quietly. Hale's friends include a man named Kent Dyer, freight broker. He has been seen near the Hallowell docks. I blinked. Hallowell. Wolf's gaze sharpened, as if a new line had appeared on a map. Continue, Saul said. Dyer is connected to an orchid collector on the east side. The collector has a greenhouse and a taste for rare blooms. He has also had trouble with customs and insurance. Wolf's mouth tightened. An orchid collector with trouble. That is a vulgar combination. I rubbed my forehead. So the flower might not be about you personally. It might be about orchids as merchandise. Wolf's eyes narrowed. No, Archie. This is about me personally because the intruder entered my Orchid Room. They did not need to do that to obtain a petal. They did it to tell me they could. He paused, then added, and because they require my cooperation. I stared at him. Cooperation with what? Wolf's eyes were cold and steady. That is what you will learn, and you will begin by visiting Hale's warehouse. I stood, because when Wolf says begin, he means now. As I reached for my coat, the phone on my desk rang. He answered, Nero Wolf's office. A voice I did not recognize said, low and calm, Mr. Goodwin, tell Mr. Wolf, the petal is not a gift, it is proof. If he wants the rest of the flower, he will do as he is asked. Then the line went dead. I stood holding the receiver, feeling the winter air in my bones even inside the brownstone. Upstairs, the orchids were still perfect, and somewhere in the city, someone had decided that perfection was a threat. Chapter 3. The warehouse sat on a street that had never heard of velvet. It was down by the river where the wind comes off the water sharp enough to cut paper, and the buildings looked like they were designed by men who hated ornament and trusted padlocks. A row of loading bays faced the street like blind mouths, and the only color in sight was the red of a stop sign and the gray of winter. I went in under the name Archie Goodwin because the place did not look like it respected aliases. The front office had a glass window with warehouse operations stenciled on it, and behind the glass was a bored girl with a headset and the tired eyes of someone who has heard too many excuses for late deliveries. I flashed my badge from Kramer's loaner collection. It was not official enough to impress a judge, but it was plenty official for an office clerk. Polis, I said. I need to see Grant Hale's office. Her fingers paused over the keyboard. He's dead. That's why I'm here, I said. She swallowed. They already searched it. Who is they? I asked. Detectives, she said, voice cautious. And then management. They said we had to get back to work. I gave her a smile that meant nothing. Management always says that. Show me, anyway. A man in a cheap suit appeared from a back door and took one look at my badge and decided it was cheaper to cooperate than to argue. He introduced himself as Ross, operations supervisor, and guided me down a hallway that smelled of stale coffee and wet cardboard. Hale's office was at the end, and it looked like someone had tried to scrub away the idea of murder with a broom. The desk was clear, too clear. The drawers were shut, aligned. The wastebasket was empty, not even a crumpled receipt. The chair had been pushed in with a neatness that suggested it had been measured. If you walk into a room where a man worked for years, and you find it stripped like a hotel room after checkout, you do not think order. You think panic disguised as efficiency. Ross gestured at the emptiness as if proud. We cleaned it up. I looked at him. Fast. He gave me a strained smile. We had to. We have shipments. You had to erase him, I said. His smile tightened. We had to continue operations. I walked to the desk and ran a finger along the top edge. No dust. No paper cut marks, no pencil scars, not even the faint indentation of a blotter. Someone had not merely tidied, they had sterilized. I opened a drawer. It was empty. I opened another. Empty. Ross shifted his weight. There was nothing important. Then you will not mind if I keep looking, I said. I checked the file cabinet. The folders inside were labeled, but the labels looked new. The paper inside was generic. The kind you print to make a cabinet look occupied for an inspection. This was the warehouse version of the Orchid room. Too perfect. I turned to Ross. Who cleaned this? Ross hesitated. Maintenance. 2 guys. Names, I said. Ross gave them. I wrote them down. Then I looked past him toward the hallway. Where is your security desk? I asked. He frowned. By the loading bays. Take me there, I said. We walked through a door into the main warehouse space, and the first thing that hit me was the sound. Forklifts beeped. Pallets scraped. The place was alive with motion, but the motion felt brittle, like everyone was afraid to pause long enough to think. The security desk was a raised platform near the big rolling doors. A guard sat there with a coffee cup and a bored posture that was not bored enough. His eyes flicked to my badge and then away too quickly. Ross said, "This is Mr. Goodwin, police." The guard nodded. "Sure. What's your name?" I asked. "Iddy," he said. "Last name," I said. He hesitated. "Santos." I nodded. "Iddy Santos, did you work last night?" He shrugged. "I work a lot of nights." "Did you see Grant Hale?" I asked. His eyes flicked. "Number, he wasn't here." "Then how do you know?" I asked. His jaw tightened. "Because he wasn't on the schedule." Ross spoke quickly. Grant didn't always follow schedules. The guard's fingers tightened around the coffee cup. I watched him for a second, then looked down casually. His right boot had a scuff of grit along the sole. Tiny, pale, irregular specks that did not look like street dirt and did not look like warehouse dust. Warehouse dust is gray and fine. This grit was mixed, slightly fibrous, with a faint reddish-brown tint. I had seen it before, under Theodore's benches, and on my own shoes, after I had been careless in Wolf's orchid room. Wolf's orchid soil is not soil in the usual sense. It is a controlled mixture, chosen like a recipe. Bark, charcoal, grit, and other odds and ends that keep roots healthy and water honest. It has a look you learn if you have ever carried Wolf's potting trays, when Theodore wasn't watching. That grit did not belong on a security guard's boot at a warehouse. I kept my voice casual. "Eddie, you ever been to West 35th Street? His head snapped up. "Number, that no was too fast." I smiled. "You sure? It's a nice street." Ross shifted. "What is this about?" I ignored him and leaned closer to the guard, like 2 men sharing a secret. "Iddy," I said softly. If you tracked that grit through a greenhouse, the plants would not like it. His face changed. Not a full reaction, just a flicker. The kind of flicker a man has when he realizes you know something you should not. I don't know what you're talking about, he said. That's what people say when they do, I replied. I straightened and turned away as if losing interest. Then I swung back. Who was in Hale's office after the police? I asked. The guard's jaw tightened. Maintenance. Names, I said. He gave them. The same names Ross had given me, which meant at least they had agreed on the lie. I nodded. Did Hale keep a notebook? Ross said quickly. Number, the guard said nothing. I let silence hang. Silence is useful. People rush to fill it, especially when they fear what it contains. A thin man in a warehouse vest approached, clipboard in hand. He looked at Ross, then at me, then decided I was a problem. Who's this? He asked. Ross said. Paulus. The man's face tightened. We already cooperated. I smiled. You cooperated with the law. Now you get to cooperate with curiosity. He did not smile. I need to get back to work. Then talk fast, I said. What's your name? He hesitated. Kip Merritt. Not the lieutenant, I said. He stared. Number, Kip, did Hale keep a notebook? I asked. Kip swallowed. His eyes flicked to Ross, then to the guard, then back to me. He looked like a man caught between loyalty and fear, and not sure which one paid better. I don't know, Kip said. I nodded. That means yes. Kip's mouth tightened. I just moved paper. That's what a notebook is, I said. Paper moved into order. Kip hesitated, then spoke quickly, as if ripping off a bandage. He had a black notebook, Kip said. He wrote late shipments in it, stuff that came in after hours. Ross snapped. Kip flinched, and then did something strange. His face went blank for a moment, like a man searching for a memory and finding a locked door. What black notebook? Kip said. I stared at him. The one you just mentioned. Kip blinked. I didn't. The guard shifted on his chair. Ross's face went stiff. I felt a chill. It was not superstition. It was pattern. Summono had told Kip something, and someone had made Kip forget he had been told. Or Kip was pretending to forget, because forgetting was safer. He leaned closer. Kip, who told you about the notebook? Kip's eyes darted. Nobody. You heard about it, I said. He swallowed. Number. Then how did you know it was black? I asked. Kip's mouth opened, closed, then opened again. He looked at Ross as if pleading. Ross said sharply, This is done. You can talk to our lawyer. I stood upright and nodded politely. Good idea. Lawyers love black notebooks. I stepped away, then looked back at Kip. Softer now. Kip, I said. Hale is dead. If someone killed him, your silence is not protection. It's a leash. Kip's eyes filled briefly, then hardened again. I don't know anything. Ross moved toward me, posture stiff. You need to leave. I smiled. I was going anyway. As I walked out, I glanced at the security guard again. Eddie Santos stared straight ahead, but his boot remained in my mind like a signature. Outside, the river wind slapped me awake. I got into a cab and called Sol Panza. Sol, I said. I have a security guard named Eddie Santos with Orchid. Room grit on his boot, a cleaned office that looks like someone apologized to it, and a clerk named Kip who mentioned a black notebook and then forgot his own mouth. Sol was quiet for a moment. That is interesting. It's alarming, I said. Sol replied. Both can be true. Find me Eddie Santos, I said. Where he lives, who he drinks with, what he owes. I will, Sol said. And Archie. Yes, do not underestimate the notebook, Sol said. Late. Night shipments mean someone was moving things they did not want daylight to see. I won't, I told him, and hung up. Back at the brownstone, Wolf was in his office, beer at hand, expression fixed in the calm that comes when his mind is already assembling a structure. Theodore had been in and out, checking on his cathedral, and Fritz had set out cold meats, with the resignation of a man feeding a household, that refuses to keep normal hours. I went straight to Wolf. Well, Wolf said, I gave him the facts, because he had demanded facts, the cleaned office, the black notebook, Kip's sudden memory failure, the security guard's boot. When I mentioned the grit, Wolf's eyes narrowed in a way that made me feel I had insulted his orchids by proxy. You are certain, Wolf said. As certain as I can be without licking the boot, I replied. Wolf's mouth tightened. Do not be vulgar. I wasn't planning to, I said, but it looked like your potting mix, not warehouse dust. Wolf leaned back slightly. Then the intruder did not merely enter my orchid room. They left with something, or they left someone with something. I frowned. You think the guard was in the orchid room? Wolf's voice was calm. Either he was or someone wishes us to believe he was. However, the physical residue is persuasive. It suggests contact. I said, and Kip forgetting, he mentioned the notebook, then acted like he never did. Wolf's eyes narrowed. Fear can induce forgetfulness. Sure, I said, but it looked rehearsed, like he was trained to blank out. Wolf's gaze sharpened. Interesting. He sat still for a moment, then said, Archie, you have confirmed my suspicion. The orchid room intrusion and Hale's murder share a style, too perfect, too clean, too deliberate. I frowned. Style like a signature. Wolf nodded. Exactly. The intruder borrowed our silence to frighten Hale. They entered my house without clumsiness, then left no mess. The message was control. Hale was supposed to remain frightened. And he didn't, I said. Wolf's eyes went cold. He died because he did not stay frightened enough. I felt my stomach tighten, meaning he talked. Wolf's voice stayed calm, or he prepared to talk. The black notebook suggests documentation. Documentation is dangerous to those who rely on secrecy. I leaned forward. So what now? Wolf's gaze fixed on me. Now you will obtain the notebook. I blinked. From a cleaned office. Wolf's mouth tightened. From the person who removed it. A man does not erase a room and leave the most valuable item behind. Someone took it. Eddie Santos. I said. Possibly, Wolf replied. Or Ross, or someone above them. We will not guess. We will compel. Compel how? I asked. Wolf took a slow sip of beer. By making them believe we already possess what they fear. I stared. That's your plan. Pretend we have the notebook. Wolf's eyes narrowed. Not pretend, suggest. I sighed. Suggest is a dangerous word in this house lately. Wolf ignored that and continued. Archie, telephone Saul. Arrange for Mr. Santos to visit this house. Voluntarily if possible, involuntarily if necessary. And if he doesn't come, I asked. Wolf's voice was flat. Then we will go to him, and we will not be gentle. I stood, reached for the phone, and then it rang before I could touch it. I answered. Nero Wolf's office. A voice I did not recognize said, low and calm, you are looking in warehouses. You should be looking in greenhouses. Then, after a brief pause, the voice added, the notebook isn't in a black cover anymore. The line went dead. I stared at the receiver, then looked at Wolf. Wolf's eyes were already narrowed, as if he had heard the words through the wire. He said, Archie. Yes. Whoever entered my orchid room, Wolf said, is now arranging our case to look perfect. We will make it imperfect. He lifted his beer, and his voice turned colder. Bring me Kent Dyer. Chapter 4. If anyone ever doubts that Nero Wolf can be moved by something smaller than a man, they should watch him react to an orchid pot being turned a quarter-inch. He did not shout. Wolf rarely wastes volume. He simply became heavier in the room, as if the air had been issued a warning. It was late afternoon, the winter light already thinning, when Wolf made Theodore wait downstairs and went up himself. That alone was a sign. Theodore is usually the high priest. Wolf is the god who approves the cathedral, and then withdraws to be worshipped at a distance. I followed, because I have been following Wolf for years, and have never learned that curiosity is hazardous. The orchid room was as it had been, warm and controlled, the damp air smelling like bark and bloom and authority. Everything looked perfect. That was the trouble. Perfect had become suspicious. Wolf moved down the central aisle with a slow certainty and stopped at the same bench he had studied in the morning. He leaned, eyes narrowing, and then placed 2 fingers on the rim of a pot. He did not lift it this time. He merely turned it a 1/4 inch. No more. He turned it back, then he stood still, eyes fixed on the mark left by the base on the bench. "That," Wolf said quietly, "is new." I leaned in. A pot was moved again. "Yes," Wolf said. "Not moved away, not exchanged, tested." I frowned. Tested for what? Wolf's eyes stayed on the pot. "Wait." I blinked. "You think someone weighed it?" Wolf's voice was dry, not with a scale, with a hand. A careful hand tests weight by shifting. That is why it was turned. The pot was not relocated. It was evaluated. "You think something is in it?" I said. Wolf's eyes narrowed. "Or beneath it?" I stared at the innocent plant, its leaves glossy, its bloom pale green like a whispered insult. The idea of a man hiding something in Wolf's orchids struck me as either clever or suicidal, depending on how fond Wolf felt toward that man at the moment. "And Theodore missed it," I said. "Theodore observes for horticultural changes," Wolf replied, "not criminal ones. That is why you are here." "Lucky me," I said. Wolf's gaze remained steady. "Archie, I will not tolerate my orchid room being used as a bank vault," I nodded. "Neither will Theodore." Wolf turned and walked to the potting bench. He opened the ledger, glanced at it without reading, then closed it again and placed his palm lightly on the cover. "Someone has been here twice," Wolf said. "Once to demonstrate entry, once to confirm the location of what they require." I frowned. "How do you know it was twice?" Wolf looked at me as if I were refusing to do arithmetic. "Because the first intrusion was theatrical. The second is practical. A man does not return to a stage unless he intends to use the props." We went downstairs. Wolf settled into his chair with beer, because beer is his way of telling his nerves they are not invited to misbehave. Fritz appeared from the kitchen at once, as if he had been listening through the walls, which he probably had. Fritz's face held the calm of a man who has fed a genius for decades, and knows that genius can be irrational about small things. "I heard you go upstairs," Fritz said. Wolf's eyes narrowed slightly. Summoners entered the orchid room again. Fritz's eyebrows lifted. Again. Wolf's voice was flat. "Did you admit any stranger to this house today?" Fritz looked faintly offended. "No, sir." Wolf held his gaze. "Any delivery?" "Only groceries," Fritz said. "From the usual man." Wolf's eyes narrowed. "Any repairman?" "No," Fritz said firmly. "No plumber, no electrician, no telephone man, no stranger." I watched Fritz's face while he spoke. Fritz lies as rarely as Wolf runs. When it happens, you notice Fritz's certainty was clean. Wolf nodded once. Then the intruder did not enter through the front door. Fritz's mouth tightened. "There is the back entrance to the basement, but I was in the kitchen, I would have heard." Wolf's eyes remained cold. "Unless the intruder had a key." Fritz went still. "A key." Wolf's voice stayed calm. "Or a familiar face." I felt a chill that had nothing to do with January. The brownstone has always been a fortress in my mind, defended by Fritz, by locks, by routine, and by the sheer fact that Wolf dislikes strangers so much, he seems to repel them by force of personality. The idea of a familiar face drifting through that defense was worse than any smashed lock. Wolf's gaze sharpened. "I think it was someone who could pass as someone we know. There is a difference, Archie, but both are intolerable." Fritz said softly. "Sir, should I call Theodore?" "No," Wolf replied. "Theodore will become excitable. Excitement is useless." Fritz nodded, which meant he agreed even if it offended his loyalty to Theodore. Fritz has never been sentimental about solutions. The doorbell rang. He went down and opened it to Saul Panzer. Saul came in, removed his hat, and his eyes flicked toward my face as if reading the temperature of the house. "Archie," he said, "he's upstairs." "Always," I said. "Come on." We went to the office. Wolf looked up, and Saul nodded. Wolf said, "Report." Saul did not waste time. Eddie Santos, the warehouse guard. I followed him after his shift. Wolf's eyes narrowed. "And he did not go home," Saul said. "He went to a diner on 10th Avenue. He met a man named Kent Dyer." That name landed with the satisfying click of a puzzle piece. Saul had mentioned it before. Now it had stepped into the room. Wolf's gaze sharpened. "Describe this meeting." Saul's voice stayed calm. They sat in a booth. They spoke briefly. Then they shook hands. It was not friendly. It was transactional, like sealing a confession. I raised an eyebrow. "A confession with ketchup?" Saul ignored me. Dyer handed Santos a small envelope. Not thick. Santos looked at it, then put it in his pocket. They did not eat. Santos left first. Wolf's eyes narrowed. "Kent Dyer is a shipping broker." "Yes," Saul said. "Freight, customs, fast routes. He arranges movement for people who do not want questions." Wolf's mouth tightened, and he now arranges silence. Saul nodded. Dyer then walked 3 blocks and entered a greenhouse supply store. He bought potting mix. I blinked. Potting mix. Saul's gaze stayed neutral. "Yes." Wolf's eyes went colder, deliberate. I leaned forward. So Dyer is either trying to imitate Wolf's orchid soil, or he is trying to hide his tracks under the cover of horticulture. Wolf looked at me. Or he is retrieving something concealed in my orchids. The pot was tested for weight. Saul said. Dyer left the supply store and went to an office on West 27th, a small shipping consultancy. His name is on the door. Wolf's eyes narrowed. Convenient. Saul nodded. Yes, not cautious. Wolf took a slow sip of beer. Then he believes we are cautious, and he is not required to be, I said. Or he believes the theater will keep us busy. Wolf's gaze sharpened. Precisely. He set the beer down with care and spoke as if issuing a recipe. Archie, you will bring Kent Dyer to this house. I stared. Bring. Wolf's eyes narrowed. Yes. In what state? I asked. Willing, unwilling, folded, or intact? Wolf looked at me without amusement. Intact, preferably willing, but you have always been creative. Saul spoke quietly. Dyer is cautious in public, but careless in private. He believes his work is invisible. I asked, do we invite him politely, or do we use Durkin? Wolf's voice stayed calm. Polite first. If he refuses, we adjust. I stood. I'll go. Wolf's eyes narrowed. Not alone. I looked at Saul. Saul gave a slight nod, which meant he was already halfway there. Fritz said from the doorway, Dinner will be at 7. Wolf replied, It will be when it is, Fritz. Fritz accepted that with the patience of a saint and withdrew. Saints have to. When geniuses are hungry. Saul and I took a cab down to West 27th. New York at dusk always looks like it is pretending to be glamorous while hiding the fact that it is tired. The streets were wet with melted slush. Lights reflected on pavement. People hurried as if deadlines were chasing them. Kent Dyer's office was on the 3rd floor of a narrow building with an elevator that groaned like it regretted, supporting commerce. His door had a frosted glass panel with Dyer Logistics stenciled in black. It looked legitimate. That alone made me suspicious. We went in. A receptionist with a headset looked up. She had the expression of someone trained to treat urgency as an inconvenience. Can I help you? She asked. I smiled. We're here to see Mr. Dyer. He is busy, she said. I leaned in slightly. Tell him Archie Goodwin is here. She blinked. Archie Goodwin. Yes, I said. If he does not know it, he should. She hesitated, then pressed a button. Mr. Dyer, there is a man here who says his name is Archie Goodwin. I watched her face as she listened. Her expression shifted slightly, like someone hearing an unexpected instruction. She hung up. He will see you. Saul and I followed her down a hallway to an office with a glass wall and a desk that was too clean. The door opened, and Kent Dyer stood there with a smile that had practiced politeness and no warmth. He was in his 40s, hair trimmed, suit decent but not expensive, eyes alert in the way a man's eyes get when his business depends on noticing details before they become problems. "Mr. Goodwin," he said, "this is unexpected." "Life is full of surprises," I replied, "especially when orchids get involved." His smile held, but his eyes tightened slightly. "Orchids?" "Yes," I said. "You bought potting mix today." Dyer's smile wavered just enough to be satisfying. "I have plants at home." "Of course you do," I said. "Everyone does. Some people keep plants. Some people keep secrets." Dyer's voice stayed smooth. "What is this about?" "It's about a dead man named Grant Hale," I said, watching him, "and an orchid petal." His eyes flicked. "I read the papers." "The papers didn't mention orchids," I said. Dyer's jaw tightened. "I meant I read about the murder." Saul spoke then, calm and mild. "Mr. Dyer, we observed you meet Eddie Santos this morning." Dyer's smile sharpened. "Do you make a habit of following people?" "Only when they deserve it," I said. Dyer glanced at Saul, then back to me. "If this is about a shipment, speak plainly." "It is about shipments," I said. "Late night shipments. The kind Hale wrote in a black notebook." Dyer's face remained composed. "I don't know what you're talking about." I nodded. "That's a popular line lately." Dyer's eyes narrowed. "Mr. Goodwin, if you have questions you can ask through my attorney." "You can call him," I said. "After you visit Nero Wolfe." That name landed in the room like a dropped weight. Dyer's smile froze. "I do not know Mr. Wolfe," Dyer said. "Sure you do," I replied. "Or you wouldn't be buying potting mix and shaking hands like you're sealing a confession." Dyer's jaw tightened. "I have business, so does Wolfe," I said. "And someone made it personal by entering his orchid room." Dyer's eyes flicked again. Quick, not surprise calculation. I leaned forward slightly. "Here's the deal. You come to Wolfe's house. You answer his questions. You leave with your evening intact. Or you decline. And I let Inspector Kramer know you have taken an interest in orchids and dead warehouse foreman." Dyer's nostrils flared. His smile vanished. "That is blackmail." I smiled. "Number, that's scheduling." Saul said softly, "Mr. Dyer, the city is cold and wide. There are many ways to become lost in it. There are also many ways to become found. We prefer found." Dyer stared at us for a long second, then looked past my shoulder toward the hallway, as if measuring escape routes. He decided against it. He exhaled. "When now?" I said. Dyer's mouth tightened. "I need my coat." "You can get it," I told him. "We're not monsters." On the way out, as we passed the receptionist, her eyes flicked toward Dyer with a question. Dyer did not answer. He walked with us like a man attending a meeting he would rather not admit exists. In the cab, Dyer stared out the window, jaw clenched. I watched his hands. They were tidy, but his fingers kept touching the inside pocket of his jacket, as if confirming something was still there. An envelope, maybe, or something smaller. Something that could turn a pot a quarter-inch and change a case. When we reached the brownstone, Wolfe was waiting in his office with beer and the calm expression of a man about to dismantle someone's comfort. I opened the door and ushered Dyer in. Wolfe looked up, eyes narrowing slightly as he studied the shipping broker like a specimen. "Mr. Dyer," Wolfe said, "you have been busy." Dyer tried to smile. "Mr. Wolfe, I don't know why I'm here." Wolfe's voice was mild. "You are here because a man is dead. My orchids have been profaned, and you believe you can trade in secrets without paying the price." Dyer's smile stiffened. "I trade in shipments." Wolfe nodded. "Yes, and men who trade in shipments also trade in secrets." Dyer opened his mouth. Wolfe lifted a hand. "Before you speak, Mr. Dyer, consider this. The only thing more expensive than cooperation is resistance." Dyer's eyes tightened. He glanced at the door. At me, at Wolfe. Then he said quietly, What do you want? Wolf leaned back, slightly, satisfied. The truth and the black notebook. Dyer went very still, and I knew we were close, because only guilty men stop moving when you say the right object out loud. Chapter 5. If you want a man to tell the truth, give him a chair and let him believe he chose it. Count Dyer sat in the red leather chair opposite Wolf's desk, as if the chair had been designed to flatter him. It did not. The chair flatters nobody. It simply receives bodies and waits to see what their mouths will do. Dyer's suit was competent, his tie conservative, his hair cut with the kind of care that says he expects to be photographed by someone who matters. He smiled at Wolf, the way a salesman smiles at a customer who has already signed, which was premature. Wolf regarded him with the mild distaste he reserves for people who try to make charm do the work of honesty. He let the silence sit long enough to make Dyer feel it. Then Wolf said, "Mr. Dyer." Dyer's smile widened. "Mr. Wolf, I have to say, I'm surprised. I do not usually meet celebrities." "I am not a celebrity," Wolf replied. "I am an inconvenience." Dyer chuckled as if they were sharing a private joke. "Sure, an inconvenience. How can I help?" "You can begin," Wolf said, "by explaining why you met Eddie Santos this morning." Dyer's smile tightened a fraction, then returned. "Eddie who?" Sol Panza was in the room, leaning against the wall near the door, looking like furniture with a conscience. Fred Durkin stood in the hall because Durkin believes in being near trouble without being invited into it. I was at my desk, notebook open, pen ready, pretending I was a clerk. Wolf hates it when I look like a cop. Wolf likes the room arranged his way. Dyer glanced at Sol, then back to Wolf. "I meet a lot of people." Wolf nodded once. "Yes, that is what brokers do. They arrange movement. They also arrange silence. You have never heard of him?" Dyer's smile widened. "Never," Wolf said. "Spell his name." Dyer laughed politely. "Why? Because you will," Wolf replied. Dyer's smile held. He looked amused. "All right, Hale." He said it cleanly, without hesitation. "The way you spell a name you have seen on paper." I let my pen pause for effect. Dyer's eyes flicked to me, and I gave him a pleasant look that promised nothing. Wolf's voice remained mild. "Interesting. You have never heard of him, yet you spell his name correctly on command." Dyer shrugged lightly. "It's a common name," Wolf nodded. "And common names are convenient for common lies." Dyer's smile tightened. "Mr. Wolf, I'm not sure why I'm being questioned like this." Wolf leaned back slightly. "Because a man using an alias was murdered, and a petal from my orchid room was placed on his body. The day before that, someone entered my orchid room without force, without clumsiness, and with an arrogance that suggests familiarity. You, Mr. Dyer, are familiar with hidden movement. That makes you relevant." Dyer's eyes narrowed. "I am not involved in any murder." Wolf's tone stayed calm. "That is not a denial. That is a claim of innocence. Claims are cheap." Dyer spread his hands. "What do you want from me?" Wolf's gaze sharpened. "Who has seen my orchid room?" Dyer's smile flickered, and I saw something in it that was not charm. It was calculation. "I haven't," Dyer said. Wolf did not move. "Have you seen a photograph of it?" "No," Dyer said, too quickly. Wolf waited. Silence is Wolf's favorite tool. It costs him nothing and makes other people spend themselves. Dyer cleared his throat. "Look, I don't know what this has to do with a warehouse foreman." Wolf's eyes narrowed. "You mean Grant Hale?" Dyer's smile twitched. "Yes, him," Wolf said. "He was not merely a foreman. He tracked late, night shipments. He kept a notebook." Dyer's jaw tightened. "I know nothing about his notebook." Wolf's voice stayed mild. "Then you will not mind if I observe what you know about my orchids." Dyer blinked. "Your orchids?" Wolf turned his head slightly toward the open doorway, as if addressing the house itself. "Archie, tell Mr. Dyer the name of my newest specimen," I said. "I'm not Theodore, but I can try." Wolf's eyes stayed on Dyer. "Do not try observe?" Dyer chuckled lightly. "You have a new orchid. Congratulations," Wolf said. "Yes. A pale bloom recently acquired. Not common, not commercially distributed, not publicly displayed." Dyer nodded, still smiling. "Right." Dyer's smile widened. "I haven't seen it," Wolf said. "Describe it anyway." Dyer hesitated, then gave a small laugh as if indulging a whim. "All right. A green-lipped one, I suppose. That's what the rare ones are, right? Exotic. Green-lipped." The room went still. If you have never seen Wolf become dangerous without moving, you have missed one of the city's quieter spectacles. His face did not change dramatically. His eyes did not flare. His mouth did not twist. He simply became calmer, and the calm had weight. Wolf's newest bloom was pale green with a distinct edge along the lip that Theodore had called an oddity and spoken about in the hushed tone reserved for reverence and expense. I had not mentioned that detail to anyone outside the house, partly because I did not care, and partly because Wolf's orchid language is not mine. Kent Dyer had just described it as if he had been standing beside it. Wolf said softly, "You have not seen it, yet you know it is green." Lipped. Dyer's smile held. It was wider now, but it did not look friendly. It looked defensive. "I guessed," he said. Wolf nodded once. "You guessed correctly. That is unfortunate for you." Dyer's eyes hardened. "Mr. Wolf, you are reading too much into a phrase." Wolf's voice remained calm. "Number, I am reading exactly enough." He shifted his gaze slightly, and I could have sworn the temperature in the office dropped. "Mr. Dyer," Wolf said, "who else has seen my orchid room?" Dyer's smile tightened. "No one. Not me. Not anyone I know." Wolf did not raise his voice. "You are lying." Dyer's jaw clenched. "You can't prove that." Wolf's eyes were cold. "I do not need to prove it to you. I need to make you understand that lying has become expensive." Dyer's smile returned, brittle. "I'm leaving." Wolf nodded, as if granting permission. "Yes, you will leave. Then you will either return with the truth, or you will be brought back by a different method, one that will offend your suit." Dyer stood. His chair squeaked slightly, and the sound felt rude in Wolf's office. Dyer glanced at Saul, then at me, then at Wolf. "I don't know what game you think you're playing," Dyer said. Wolf's voice stayed mild. "It is not a game, it is an inventory." Dyer's eyes narrowed. "Of what?" Wolf said. "Of the people who believe they can touch my orchids and live comfortably afterward." Dyer's smile vanished. He turned and walked out. Saul's eyes followed him. Saul did not move, but I knew he would. Saul Panzer is like gravity. You do not see him do his work, but things do not drift far when he is near. The front door closed downstairs, and Wolf sat very still for a moment, staring at the space Dyer had occupied. I said, "Green. Lipped." That wasn't a guess. Wolf's voice stayed calm. "Number, it was a leak." Saul spoke quietly. "He has been near something that was near your orchids." Wolf nodded once. "Yes." I frowned. "Who gets near the orchid room besides Theodore, Fritz, and us?" "Not many." Wolf's eyes narrowed. "Not many is still too many." The intruder had access, either through a path, or through trust, or through the appearance of trust. Before I could say anything clever, the phone rang on my desk. I answered, Nero Wolf's office. Kramer's voice came through, sour and brisk. "Goodwin, put Wolf on." I held the receiver out. Wolf did not take it at once. He looked at me as if reminding me that he dislikes being summoned. Then he took it. "Yes, Inspector," Wolf said. Kramer spoke fast, as if afraid Wolf might hang up out of principle. "Hale's notebook is missing. We searched his place, his office, his locker, everything. Nothing, but we found something else." Wolf's eyes narrowed. "Yes." "A torn page," Kramer said, "in a trash bin near your block. Not in your bin, a street can. A page ripped out of a notebook, black cover fibers, like a pocket ledger with its wrap torn off. I felt my spine tighten. Kramer's voice continued. "It has handwriting," Kramer said. "Numbers, dates, partial names, and one thing that made me call you instead of filing it and forgetting it." Wolf's voice was calm. "What thing?" Kramer paused, then said, "An address, West 35th Street, your house number, written, and then scratched out hard, like someone tried to erase it with anger." Wolf's eyes went cold. "Bring it," Wolf said. Kramer snorted. "I'm not your delivery boy," Wolf replied. "Then I will send Archie to collect it, and you will waste an hour arguing about jurisdiction. Choose." There was a brief silence on the line, filled with the sound of Kramer deciding how much he hated Wolf, compared to how much he hated losing control of evidence. Finally, Kramer growled, "Fine, I'll have Malloy bring a copy. But Wolf, listen to me. This is getting stupid." Wolf's voice stayed mild. It became stupid when someone believed they could bargain with orchids. Kramer hung up. Wolf set the receiver down and looked at Saul. "Follow Dyer." Saul nodded. "Already." Wolf looked at me. "Archie, you will prepare for an unpleasant visit." I frowned. "Whose?" Wolf's eyes narrowed. "The person who has access to my orchid room. Mr. Dyer's knowledge did not come from a newspaper. It came from proximity. We will discover the path." I leaned back, thinking of Fritz's certainty that no stranger entered the front, and of the pot turned a quarter-inch, like a hand testing weight. I said, "So we have a missing notebook, a torn page near our block, and a broker who knows your bloom by its lip." Wolf nodded. "And a murderer who wishes to make this house part of the narrative." He lifted his beer, took a slow sip, and set it down with care. "Archie," Wolf said, "Summoner has been using my orchids as a mailbox." I raised an eyebrow. "And you don't like getting mail?" Wolf's eyes were cold. "Number, I do not." He paused, then added, "We will answer it." When Saul returned, I knew the next message would not be a petal. It would be something heavier. Chapter 6. The torn page arrived the way bad news usually does in our line of work, carried by someone who did not want to be responsible for it. Lieutenant Malloy came up the steps with his collar turned up and his patience turned down. He handed me an envelope as if it might stain him. "Copy," he said. "Kramer's keeping the original." I opened it at my desk and slid the sheet out. It was narrow, ripped from a small notebook, the paper rough at the torn edge. The handwriting was quick, cramped and angry. It had the look of a man writing fast, because he believes time is not on his side. There were columns, dates, numbers, a few short words that looked like abbreviations, and a set of marks that were not words at all, just little hooks and angles, like someone inventing code while trying not to look like he was inventing code. Wolf did not reach for it. Wolf rarely reaches. He lets things come to him. I brought it to his desk. Wolf took it between finger and thumb as if it were contaminated, then laid it flat and stared at it in complete silence. Silence with Wolf is not emptiness. It is machinery. After a minute he said, "This is not a list of shipments." I blinked. "It looks like one. It is meant to look like one," Wolf replied. "That is not the same." He tapped a number with the tip of his finger. "These are not simply counts. They are habits. They are expectations. They are the kind of repetition that men rely on when they believe the world is predictable." I looked at the page again. "You can read habits off numbers." Wolf's eyes narrowed. "I can read human behavior off anything. Archie, numbers are simply less sentimental." He read aloud, not the whole page, only what mattered. "Tuesday, 1 to 12, Bay 4, 16 plus 3. Mark initials. Friday, 1 to 15, Bay 2, 10 plus 3. Mark initials. Monday, 1 to 18, Bay 4, 12 plus 3. He paused and looked up at me. "Do you notice?" "The plus 3 keeps showing up," I said. Wolf nodded. "Exactly, a warehouse foreman who knows his work does not write plus signs." He writes totals. A plus sign indicates an addition that is not part of the expected total. Something extra. Something that is not supposed to be remembered. Saul Panzer was seated in the red leather chair, calm and attentive, as if he were watching a chess game. Fritz was in the doorway briefly, then withdrew, because Fritz has good judgment about when to avoid the office. Wolf continued. Grant Hale was tracking extra crates. I said, extra crates in a warehouse is not unusual. Wolf looked at me as if I had proposed that extra bullets are not unusual in a gun. Extra crates that vanish from records are unusual. He tapped another column. These marks. See the small triangle. It appears only on 3 dates. I leaned in. Those dates line up with something. Wolf's voice stayed calm. Inspections. I blinked. How do you know? Wolf lifted his eyes. Because contraband is moved when honest eyes are expected. A man moving illicit goods does not choose quiet nights. He chooses noisy ones. He chooses the nights when everyone is distracted by official scrutiny. Saul spoke quietly. The city schedules dock inspections, also warehouse safety inspections. Those dates can be checked. Wolf nodded. Yes, Archie will check them. I sighed. Of course I will. Wolf's eyes were cold. Do not sigh. This page is the only part of the notebook the murderer failed to control. That makes it valuable, I said. Or it's bait. Wolf nodded once. Possibly, but bait can still be eaten if you chew carefully. We spent the next hour turning Hale's angry scribble into something that made sense. Not perfect sense. Sense is rarely perfect, but enough. The +3 appeared on nights when inspections were scheduled. The bay numbers alternated between 2 loading bays that were far from the front office and close to the security desk. The same initials appeared after each entry. A pair of letters that could have been a person or a code. Wolf watched my pen work and said, the initials are the weak point. Because they might be someone's name, I said. Because they might be someone's fear, Wolf replied. Men write initials when full names are dangerous, Saul offered. Could be an inspector. Wolf's gaze sharpened slightly. Yes. I looked at the page again. If these were inspection nights, who was inspecting city private insurance? Wolf's voice was flat. All of them have one thing in common. A man must sign paper, find the man. So I did what I always do when Wolf points at an idea and says find it. I went out into the city and tried to locate the human being attached to it. By late afternoon I had a name, a night inspector who worked for a private compliance firm that serviced warehouses. When the city demanded proof, someone was watching. His name was Elmore Quay, and he had the kind of job that makes you unpopular by simply existing. I found him at his office on 8th Avenue, a narrow place with peeling paint and a front desk that looked as if it had been punched by boredom. Quay was in his 40s, thin, with hair that had been cut too often, for practical reasons, and eyes that flicked to the door as soon as I entered. He looked like a man who had been taught to expect trouble. I introduced myself, produced enough of an official manner to keep him from throwing me out immediately, and said, Mr. Quay, I have questions about warehouse inspections. His eyes narrowed. I already spoke to police. I'm not police, I said. I'm the man who talks to the man the police complain about. That made him blink. Wolf. Yes, I said. Now we are speaking the same language. He hesitated, then gestured toward a chair. I sat. He remained standing, which told me he did not feel safe sitting. What do you want? He asked. I want to know why certain extra crates moved on nights when inspections were scheduled, I said. And why a man named Grant Hale was tracking them. Quay's face tightened. Then you won't mind telling me about the scheduled inspections, I replied. His eyes flicked, and his mouth tightened further. It's routine. It's a pattern, I said, and patterns are only routine until someone dies. That landed. Quay swallowed. Did you inspect Hale's warehouse? I asked. He hesitated. Yes. On the dates on this page, I said, and showed him a copy of the torn sheet. His eyes widened slightly when he saw it. Not surprise at the existence of the page, recognition of the dates, he said. Where did you get that? From a trash can near Wolf's house, I replied. So someone wants Wolf involved. That means someone thinks Wolf can be pressured. Quay's gaze darted. I don't know what you mean. I leaned in slightly. You do, because your hands are shaking, and your eyes keep checking the door like you're waiting for a photographer. Quay's mouth opened, then shut. He swallowed hard. Mr. Quay, I said softly, were you threatened? He stared at me for a long second. Then his shoulders sagged just a fraction, as if he had been holding something up, and it had finally grown too heavy. Yes, he whispered. By whom? I asked. Quay shook his head quickly. I can't. I kept my voice calm. You can, because if you don't, you become the next dead man with a flower on him. Quay flinched at the word flower. He whispered, they have photos. I blinked. Photos of what? Quay's voice tightened. Of me, inside a house. I felt the air shift. What house? I asked. Though I already knew. Quay's eyes lifted, terrified. Wolf's. For a moment I did not speak. My mind ran through the picture and found only one place inside Wolf's house that a blackmailer would care to photograph, because it was the place Wolf cared about most. The Orchid room, I said. Quay swallowed and nodded. My stomach tightened. You have been in Wolf's Orchid room. I have never met Wolf, Quay said quickly. I was never in his house. Not like that. The photos are real, but I didn't go there. I stared at him. That sentence is a knot. Quay's voice cracked. They took them, I don't know how. They showed them to me. They said, if I talk, those photos go to the police and the papers, and I'm the man who broke into Nero Wolf's orchids. Who showed you? I asked. Quay shook his head again, frantic. I didn't see a face. It was in my car, a plain envelope on the seat, photos inside, and a note. What note? I asked. Quay's hands trembled. It said, be blind on inspection nights, or you will be seen in the Orchid room. I felt cold. Wolf's Orchid room had become a stage set, a backdrop for blackmail. Whoever had entered it had not done it for flowers at all. Which inspection nights? I asked. Quay swallowed. The ones at Hale's warehouse. They told me not to log certain crates, not to ask why the count did not match the paperwork, not to look at Bay 4 when the supervisor said Bay 2. And you complied, I said. Quay's eyes filled with shame. I have a family. I have a mortgage, and those photos would ruin me. They did ruin Hale, I said. Quay flinched. I didn't kill him. I didn't say you did, I replied. I said your blindness helped someone move something. Hale tracked it anyway. That's why he's dead. Quay's mouth tightened. What were they moving? That's what I'm trying to find out, I said. Quay whispered. If you go after them, they'll kill me. I stood. If you don't tell the truth, they might anyway. At least now you have a choice. He stared at me, breathing hard. I said, give me the photos. Quay shook his head. I don't have them. You didn't keep them, I said. He looked miserable. I burned them. I couldn't stand seeing them. I believed him. Some men cannot tolerate the evidence of their own fear. All right, I said, then give me the envelope. Any note, any mark. He shook his head again. Gone. I nodded. Then you will give me a statement to Kramer, and you will do it now, before you have time to be frightened back into silence. Quay's eyes widened. Now? Yes, I said, because fear works best with time. I left his office and called Wolf from the sidewalk, the wind coming off the avenue hard enough to make my eyes water. Wolf answered on the second ring. Yes. The torn page is inspection nights, I said. Extra crates moved on those nights and vanished from records. The night inspector, Elmore Quay, was threatened into being blind. Wolf's voice stayed calm. Threatened how? When he does, it means a thought has landed that he dislikes. Then Wolf said, quietly, so. They didn't steal plants, I said. They stole a backdrop. Your orchid room is being used to make innocent men look guilty. And whoever is doing it has access, I added. Not just once. Enough to stage it. Enough to take photographs that look convincing. Wolf's reply was clipped. Bring Quay's statement to Inspector Kramer, then return here, at once. I hesitated. Wolf, if they can put a man in your orchid room with a camera, they can put anyone there. Wolf's voice went hard. Precisely. The line went dead. I stood for a moment on the sidewalk, watching people hurry past with their collars up and their minds elsewhere, and I thought of Wolf's cathedral upstairs, warm and perfect and violated. When someone steals your backdrop, they can frame you in any story they choose. And the worst part was not that they had framed Wolf. The worst part was that they were confident they could do it again. When I got back to the brownstone, Wolf was already standing in the office doorway, looking up the stairs as if his eyes could pierce floors. He said, Archie, yes, tonight. Wolf said, we will discover the other path. I frowned. Other path into the orchid room. Wolf nodded. The intruder did not come through the front door. Fritz admits no stranger entered. Therefore there is a route, or a key, or a face that is treated as familiar. We will find it. And if we don't, I said, Wolf's eyes were cold, then we will give the intruder another opportunity. That was Wolf announcing a trap, and when Wolf announces a trap, it means someone is about to step into it. Upstairs, the orchids waited. And somewhere in the city, someone had photographs ready to deploy like a weapon. The next time the door to that room opened at night, I intended to be there to see who walked through. Chapter 7, the second petal, arrived the way the first one had, with the same confidence and a little more cruelty. Elmore Quay came to our house the next evening under escort, not in handcuffs, but in the emotional equivalent. He looked as if he had not slept in days, and his face showed it. His face was pinched, his eyes raw, and his hands kept trying to find something to do that would not look like trembling. Kramer brought him. Kramer always brings his irritation too. They entered the office with Kramer in front, Quay behind him, and two plainclothes, men hovering in the hall like reminders. Wolf was in his chair behind the desk. Fritz was nowhere visible, but certainly within range, and Saul Panzer was seated in the red leather chair looking like the only calm object in a room full of nervous humans. Kramer grunted. All right, Wolf, here he is, your inspector. Wolf regarded Quay for a long moment. Wolf can make a man feel examined without lifting a hand. Quay swallowed hard. Mr. Quay, Wolf said, sit. Quay sat on the edge of the chair as if afraid it might accuse him. Wolf's voice stayed calm. Archie informs me you were threatened into negligence. Quay's throat worked. Yes, Kramer snapped. Tell him the whole thing, Quay. Don't start editing now. Quay nodded quickly and began, words spilling out unevenly, like a man emptying a pocket of dangerous objects. He described the anonymous envelope, the photographs, the note, the instruction to be blind on inspection nights, the money that was promised, and the ruin that was implied. He admitted he had complied, and his shame was so thick in the room you could have scraped it off the carpet. Wolf listened, eyes narrowed, hands folded on the desk. When Quay finished, Wolf said, You are fortunate. Quay blinked. Fortunate. Wolf's tone was dry. Yes, you were not murdered. That is fortune, however undeserved. Quay flinched. They won't stop. Wolf regarded him. Number, they will attempt to improve their security. They will also attempt to eliminate loose ends. Kramer grunted. Loose ends like him. Wolf nodded once. Precisely. Quay's voice rose, panicked. I told you, I'll cooperate. I'll sign statements. I'll testify. Wolf's gaze was steady. That is wise. It is also dangerous. You will be protected, Kramer snorted. Protected by what? Your orchids. Wolf did not look at him. By the police, Inspector, since you are already here. Kramer's mouth tightened. We'll do what we can. Wolf's eyes shifted back to Quay. Now tell me the name of the man who ordered you to look away. Quay swallowed. I never saw him clearly. Wolf's tone stayed calm. You saw enough to describe. Quay hesitated, then said, medium height, dark coat, gloves. He spoke carefully, like he did not want his voice remembered. Did he name himself? Wolf asked. Quay shook his head. Number, did he name anyone else? Wolf asked. Quay's hands clenched. He said the money came through a broker. He said it was clean. He said I would like the arrangement. Wolf's eyes narrowed. A broker? Quay nodded. A shipping broker, I think. Kramer looked at me. You hear that? I said. We have been hearing it. Wolf leaned back slightly. Describe the money. Quay's eyes flicked. Cash, neat stacks, like it had been counted by someone who enjoys counting. Wolf's gaze sharpened. Did he show you the Orchid room photographs? Quay nodded. Yes, he held them like proof. Wolf's mouth tightened. Yes, proof used as poison. Kramer leaned forward. Quay, did you keep the envelope? The note. Quay shook his head miserably. Number, I burned them. Kramer muttered something impolite about civilians and evidence. Wolf did not comment. He simply watched Quay as if he were deciding how much of the man was salvageable. Then Wolf said, You will remain here until Inspector Kramer decides where to place you. Quay's eyes widened. Here? Wolf's tone remained mild. This house is difficult to enter unnoticed. That is the point of our current difficulty, but it still has advantages. Kramer snorted. I don't like leaving witnesses in your house. Wolf looked at him. Then remove the intruder from my house, Inspector, and I will be delighted to return to my routines. Kramer glared, but said nothing. That should have been the end of it for the moment. Then I noticed Quay's coat. It was draped over his chair, a plain dark coat, cheap fabric, city practical. Quay kept glancing at it as if it might bite him. I stepped closer, because I have never been able to leave well enough alone, and brushed my hand along the outer pocket, as if checking for a receipt or a cigarette. My fingers met something stiff and thin. I pulled it out. A petal, pale green, pressed flat, delicate and smug. For a second I just stared at it, because the repetition was too arrogant to be coincidence. Then I held it up. Kramer's head snapped around. What the hell is that? Wolf's eyes narrowed. Saul's gaze sharpened. Quay's face went white. It was in your pocket, I said to Quay. Quay's voice cracked. Number, it wasn't. I didn't put it there. Then someone else did, I said. Kramer reached for it, then stopped, remembered gloves, and swore again. One of the plainclothes men stepped forward with a small evidence bag, like a magician producing a rabbit. Wolf spoke, calm but cold. This is a message. Kramer growled. No kidding. Wolf's gaze stayed on Quay. It was placed after you entered this house, or before you did. Which? Quay shook his head rapidly. I didn't check my pockets. I just came here, I said. You were escorted from your office to your car. At the curb. For a moment, Kramer was arguing with someone. Kramer barked. Arguing? I was talking. I ignored him. At the curb. That's enough. Wolf's voice was flat. They can reach you anywhere. That is their claim, Quay whispered. They'll kill me. Wolf looked at him, perhaps. But they will have more difficulty doing it in this house, because we will be watching Archie store that petal properly. I did. Kramer exhaled harshly. This is getting personal. Wolf's eyes narrowed. It has been personal since they entered my Orchid room. You are late to the emotion, Inspector. Kramer muttered something and walked to the window, looking down at the street as if he could glare criminals into confession. Saul spoke quietly. I have information. Wolf's gaze shifted. Yes. Saul's voice was calm, and the calm made it sound worse. Kent Dyer's broker license is clean. No disciplinary actions, no complaints, no official trouble. Kramer turned. So he's legit. Saul continued. Officially, unofficially, his bank deposits are dirty, cash deposits, regular, neat stacks, arriving after each occurrence that matches the pattern of the extra crates. Kramer's eyes narrowed. You looked at his bank deposits, Saul said. I looked at the world. The world includes banks, Kramer grunted. How much? Saul named an amount. It was not enormous, which would have been flamboyant, but it was too steady to be accidental. The kind of money a man receives when he is paid per unit, per crate, per silence. Wolf's eyes narrowed further. After each extra crate. Saul nodded. The timing aligns, I said. So Dyer is either the broker moving the extra crates, or the broker collecting the fee, or both. Wolf's voice stayed calm. Yes. Quay stared at Saul as if trying to decide whether Saul was saving him or sealing him. Kramer said, "We can nail him for tax issues if nothing else." Wolf looked at Kramer as if he had suggested using a sledgehammer to prune a rose. "Yes, Inspector, you can always arrest a man for money, but we require more than arrest. We require the structure. We require the identity of the man who used my orchids as a stage set." Kramer's jaw tightened. "You and your orchids." Wolf's eyes went colder. "Inspector, they are pruning witnesses." Kramer frowned. "Pruning." Wolf leaned forward slightly. "Grant Hale is dead. His notebook is missing. A torn page appears near my block. The inspector who could testify is threatened and is now marked with a petal. The shipping broker is paid in cash after each extra crate. Do you see it?" Kramer hesitated, then grunted. "They're cleaning up." Wolf nodded. "Yes," quietly. "Before anyone notices the missing shape, like a gardener prunes stems. He does not wait until the plant becomes a tangle. He cuts early, and he cuts what might grow inconveniently." The room went quiet for a moment. Even Kramer stopped talking, Quay whispered. "So, I'm next." Wolf's gaze stayed steady. "Possibly. That is why you are here." Kramer grumbled. "I don't like this." Wolf looked at him. "You are not required to like it. You are required to prevent murder." Kramer's face reddened. "I'm doing my job." Wolf nodded. "Then do it well. Begin by finding who can enter my house without Fritz, admitting a stranger. That route is the key to your murderer's confidence." Kramer bristled. "You think the killer came through your house?" Wolf's voice was flat. "Someone did. Someone used my orchid room as a backdrop for blackmail. That person is either the killer or works with the killer. In either case, they are near enough to be dangerous." Saul said, "Dyer left your house and went to a bar on 9th Avenue. He met a man there. Not Dyer, a different man." Wolf's eyes narrowed. "Describe him." Saul's gaze was calm. "Tall, careful gloves. He did not drink." He listened. Quay stiffened visibly, like a dog hearing a familiar step. Wolf's eyes went colder. The man who showed the photos. Quay swallowed. "Maybe," Kramer snapped. "Did you get a name?" Saul said. "Not yet, but I can follow him again. He is not invisible. He believes he is." Wolf nodded once. "You will." Then Wolf looked at me. "Archie, yes. You will visit Dyer's office again," Wolf said. "Not as a request, as an event." I raised an eyebrow. "You want me to frighten him?" Wolf's voice stayed calm. "Number, I want you to offer him a choice. A man paid in cash for extra crates will eventually fear he will be paid in handcuffs. Fear makes men talk. And if fear makes him run," I said. Wolf's eyes narrowed. "Then we watch where he runs. We are tracing paths. The path into my orchid room. The path out of Hale's notebook. The path that places petals in pockets." Kramer growled. "This is nuts." Wolf's gaze did not soften. "It is method. You may return to your precinct and call it nuts, or you may remain and catch the man who believes he can rearrange lives like potted plants." Kramer glared, then exhaled. "Fine. I'm posting a man outside your house." Wolf's voice was dry. "One man will not be enough." Kramer snapped. "It's what I have." Wolf nodded as if accepting a poor substitute, then use him wisely. When the room finally broke up, Quay was taken upstairs to the spare room. Durkin positioned himself like a silent hinge near the back, and Saul slipped out to continue being gravity in motion. I remained at my desk, staring at the evidence bag with the pale green petal inside it. It was delicate. It was harmless on its own. It was also a declaration. Summonen was telling us they could put Wolf's orchid room wherever they wanted. On a corpse, in a pocket, in a headline. If they felt like it. Wolf stood behind me for a moment, and his voice came quiet, almost thoughtful. They are bold, he said. Bold is one word, I replied. Insane is another. Wolf's tone was flat, not insane, confident. I turned and looked at him. Confident they can keep pruning witnesses. Wolf's eyes were hard. Yes, and that means we must stop them before the garden becomes empty. Outside, New York kept moving, indifferent as always. Inside the brownstone, a petal sat in plastic and pretended to be small. Wolf did not believe it. Neither did I. Chapter 8. Wolf does not approve of traps that depend on running. He believes a trap should depend on sitting, preferably in a comfortable chair, with the prey doing the exhausting part. That is why the announcement went out as if it were a social favor. At 4 o'clock that afternoon, Wolf told me to telephone 3 people who thought they were too important to be refused. One was a museum patron who collected rare books and rarer gossip. One was a restaurant man who knew which private rooms were used for quiet deals. The third was a woman who chaired charity committees and could spread a rumor faster than a winter draft under our front door. I made the calls, said the right words, and let each person believe they had discovered a privilege. A private orchid viewing, I said, for serious donors only. Mr. Wolf is opening his orchid room for a select few. There will be refreshments, no press. When I hung up, I asked Wolf, "Do you want a guest list or a lineup?" Wolf took a slow sip of beer. "I want a leak. A leak attracts the right rats." Fritz had prepared refreshments with the stiff dignity of a man who refuses to let criminality spoil hospitality. There were small sandwiches that tasted like someone cared, and a tray of pastries that looked too innocent for the use they were about to serve. I noticed Wolf's mood lift a fraction when he saw the tray. Even his indignation has a stomach. Saul Panzer came and went, quiet as always, checking the street and the neighbors and anything else that could become an entry point. Fred Durkin stationed himself in the hall with the patience of a man who can wait hours to move 3 steps. By 7, the rumor had traveled where Wolf wanted it to travel, into the kinds of bars where men sip expensive liquor and call it an investment, and into the kinds of back offices where shipping manifests are discussed like prayers. At 8, the bell rang. He opened the front door and found Kent Dyer on the stoop, smiling too wide as if he were early to a party he had already decided to control. "This is an honor." "It's an elevator ride," I replied. "Come in." He stepped inside, eyes flicking past me as if cataloging the house. He was not looking at the furniture, he was looking at the roots. Behind him stood Eddie Santos, the warehouse security guard, stiff in a cheap jacket, eyes darting, hands in his pockets as if he could hide his own guilt by keeping it warm. He looked like a man who would rather be anywhere than in Nero Wolf's front hall. "Eddie?" I said pleasantly. "Nice boots." He flinched. Dyer's smile tightened. Then a third man entered, heavier and older, with an operations manager's posture and an operations manager's confidence. He introduced himself without being asked. "Calvin Ross," he said. And then, "Warehouse operations." I stared for a beat. Ross. Ross's eyes narrowed. "What?" "Nothing," I said. "Just appreciating originality." Ross did not smile. He looked past me, up the stairs, and then back at Dyer as if verifying that this was still a controlled situation. And then the fourth man arrived. He was clean, cut the kind of clean that looks like it came from a barber with opinions. He wore a neat suit, no gloves, and a calm expression that would have been reassuring if his eyes had not been working so hard. He looked at the brownstone, the way a man looks at a room he intends to measure. He smiled at me. "Archie Goodwin." I blinked. "Do we know each other?" "Not yet," he said. "My name is Martin Pell. I invest in specialized assets." That was a phrase that can mean anything from art to stolen freight. He said it smoothly. with the confidence of someone who expects language to protect him. I stepped aside and let them in. Fritz appeared at the top of the stairs, glanced down, and then vanished without a word. Fritz does not like strangers in the house. He dislikes them more when they arrive in clusters. I led them to the office. Wolf was behind his desk, shoulders broad, expression composed, as if he were receiving donors instead of possible criminals. Dyer moved forward first. "Mr. Wolf, thank you for inviting us." Wolf regarded him with mild disapproval. "I did not invite you, Mr. Dyer. I permitted you." Dyer's smile wobbled but recovered. "I appreciate the distinction." Wolf's eyes shifted to Eddie Santos and Ross. "Mr. Santos." "Mr. Ross." Santos swallowed. Ross blinked, annoyed, as if he disliked being named. Then Wolf looked at the clean-cut man. "And you are?" "Martin Pell," the man said. "I represent a group of investors interested in rare botanical holdings." Wolf's eyes narrowed. "Botanical holdings." Pell's smile was polite. "Certain orchids can be worth more than gold." Wolf's voice was flat. "Gold does not require watering." Pell chuckled lightly, as if they were sharing a civilized joke. Wolf did not chuckle. Wolf does not share jokes with men he has not weighed. Wolf gestured to the chairs. "Sit, Archie will serve refreshments. Then we will proceed upstairs." I served the coffee and the sandwiches, because even traps require manners. Dyer ate nothing, which meant he wanted his hands free. Ross ate a sandwich quickly, like a man who believes food is fuel. Santos declined, which meant his stomach had already turned. Pell accepted coffee and held the cup with care, eyes scanning the room as if deciding where the danger might come from. Wolf watched all of it without looking like he was watching. After 10 minutes, Wolf rose. "Now," we went upstairs, and if you have never seen 4 men climb those stairs while trying to look casual, you have missed a useful lesson in human vanity. They all tried to appear as if they belonged, as if Wolf's brownstone were a place they visited regularly, as if the wallpaper and the banister and the smell of Fritz's cooking were merely part of their routine. They did not belong. The house knows. At the 3rd-floor landing, Wolf paused at the orchid room door. Theodore was not present. Wolf had insisted on that. For Theodore's safety and for Theodore's blood pressure. The door opened and warm air rolled out. The room glowed, humid and controlled, benches aligned, light steady, the green bloom visible near the far wall like a pale flame. Santos hesitated at the threshold. Ross stepped in, eyes narrowing at the setup, as if judging it the way he judged warehouse rows. Dyer entered with a faint smile, the smile of a man who thinks he understands value. Pell stepped in last, and his eyes went immediately to the green, lipped orchid, not to the room, not to the humidity gauge, not to the benches, to the plant. His gaze lingered, measuring. Wolf observed that and filed it away. He moved slowly down the central aisle, stopping by the green bloom as if it were the guest of honor. The flower was pale green, with that distinct lip that Dyer had named too easily. Wolf said, almost casually, "This specimen is rare. Its market value is high. Its botanical value is higher." Pell said, "It is beautiful." Wolf regarded him. "Beauty is not its primary function." Dyer cleared his throat. "Mr. Wolf, we are honored to see it." Wolf turned slightly. "You are not here to see it. You are here because someone has been using my orchids as a prop." The air tightened. Santos swallowed audibly. Ross's jaw clenched. Dyer's smile stayed in place, but it had become stiff. Pell's eyes flicked to Wolf, then away too quickly. Wolf continued as if speaking about humidity. "A man is dead. Grant Hale, also known as Calvin Rourke. A petal was placed on his body." "I told you I never heard of him." Wolf's eyes narrowed. "You spelled his name correctly. I remember." Ross's face twitched. Wolf moved his gaze across them, slow and deliberate. "A notebook is missing, a black notebook, pages torn out. One page discarded near my block. It contained numbers. Those numbers described extra crates moved on inspection nights. Santos's throat bobbed. Ross's eyes flicked toward the floor, then back up. Dyer's mouth tightened. Pell's coffee cup remained steady, but his fingers tightened around it. Wolf watched the flickers, the tightening throats, the small betrayals. He did not pounce. Wolf never pounces. He waits until the prey convinces itself it is safe, then closes the door, he said. I mention the notebook because people who deal in extra crates often believe paper is their shield. It is not. Paper is a trail. Pell spoke lightly. Mr. Wolf, this seems a strange setting for business. Wolf looked at him. Number, it is the correct setting for truth. This room has been used as a backdrop for blackmail. Therefore the person who used it believes it protects them. I will demonstrate that it does not. Dyer's smile tightened. Blackmail? You mean the photographs? Wolf's eyes narrowed. Yes, the photographs shown to Elmore Quay. Photographs that place him here without his consent. Photographs that were used to make him blind. Santos flinched. Ross's mouth tightened. Dyer's gaze flicked, quick toward Santos, then away. Pell's eyes sharpened. He was watching too closely now, as if the words Wolf spoke had stepped on something that belonged to him. Wolf said quietly, Mr. Pell, you have been examining this room with interest. Have you been photographed here? Pell smiled politely. Number Wolf nodded. Then you will not mind if I ask you to step into the hall. Pell's smile held. Why? Wolf's voice stayed mild. Because I wish to observe your reaction to separation. Pell's eyes tightened. I am not here to be tested. Wolf's eyes were cold. Yes, you are. Pell's jaw clenched, and for the first time his Polish slipped. It was slight, but in Wolf's house, slight is loud. Then the gunshot cracked. It came from the hall outside the Orchid room, sharp and sudden, and for a split second the world narrowed to sound. Pell jerked as if punched. His coffee cup flew from his hand, arcing and smashing against the bench with a spray of dark liquid. He staggered backward, eyes wide, mouth open, and then he fell. He fell hard, collapsing onto the floor near the doorway. One arm twisted beneath him. For a heartbeat, nobody moved. The orchids did not tremble. The benches did not shift. The only movement was Santos's face draining of color, and Dyer's smile collapsing into something like horror. Then Wolf spoke, voice flat and precise. Archie, the hall. I was already moving. I stepped over Pell's body, feeling the sick lurch of familiarity that comes when violence enters a room that should have been safe. Durkin was in the hall, eyes wide, gun already drawn, staring down the corridor toward the stairs. Shot came from below, Durkin said tightly. From the stairwell angle, I caught a glimpse. Tall man, gloves, already backing down fast, gone before I could get a bead. I ran to the top of the stairs and looked down. The second-floor landing was empty. The front hall below was quiet. Too quiet. From behind me, Santos made a choking sound. Ross muttered, Jesus. Wolf's voice came from the Orchid room, calm but colder than the winter outside. Do not touch anything. I turned back. Pell lay still. Blood spread on his shirt, dark and fast. His eyes were open, staring at nothing. And there, stuck to his sleeve near the cuff, was an orchid petal, pale green pressed against the fabric as if someone had placed it carefully. A calling card again, a signature again, a message that said the killer could kill in Wolf's house and still arrange the scene to look perfect. Kramer's voice bellowed from downstairs, furious and confused. What the hell was that? I stared at the petal, and my mouth went dry. Wolf stood over the body, huge and motionless, his face composed in the way a judge's face is composed when the court has been insulted. He said quietly, to no one in particular, now, it is not only my cathedral that has been breathed on, it is my house. Dyer's voice shook. Mr. Wolf, I didn't, I swear. Wolf did not look at him. His eyes were on the petal. Summono, Wolf said, is pruning the garden in my presence. Durkin moved past me, heading down the stairs with controlled speed, and I knew the shooter was already gone. That was the point. The shooter did not need to stay. The shooter needed only to show that even here, in Wolf's sanctuary, death could arrive on schedule. As I reached for the phone to call for an ambulance that would be too late, I felt the shape of the case shift. This was no longer about a notebook or extra crates. It was about a murderer who had just demonstrated that he could turn Wolf's house into a stage, and then take a bow with a petal pinned to the costume. And the worst part was the thought that would not leave my mind as I watched Wolf stare at the dead man on his Orchid room floor. If the killer could do this here...
Then the other path into the Orchid room was not just a route. It was an invitation. Chapter 9, when Inspector Kramer is forced to climb 3 flights of stairs in a hurry, the city's crime rate suffers because all of his anger arrives in one place at once. He burst into the Orchid room doorway with his coat flaring, his face red, and his voice already loaded for indictment. "Wolf," he roared, "your place has become a crime scene." Wolf did not turn his head. He stood beside Martin Pell's body like a monument to offended order. The orchids behind him were still, the benches neat, the humid air continuing its routine, as if it had not just been violated by death. Kramer took one look at the corpse and then swung his glare to Dyer, Santos, and Ross, who were lined up near the far bench as if Wolf had arranged them there for display. "You." Kramer barked at Dyer, "You're under arrest." Dyer's mouth opened, and no sound came out at first. Then he sputtered, "Inspector, I did not shoot anyone. I'm a broker," Kramer snapped. "You're something, and you're in a locked room with a dead man and Nero Wolf's orchids. That's enough for me right now." He reached toward his pocket for cuffs. Wolf's voice cut through the humid air, calm and absolute. "No, Inspector." Kramer froze mid-motion, eyes snapping to Wolf. "What did you say?" Wolf turned slowly, his expression composed, his eyes cold. "You will not put handcuffs on anyone until you have listened." Kramer's face darkened. "Listen, a man just got shot in your damn greenhouse." "It is not a greenhouse," Wolf said, and the correction landed with a ridiculous sharpness given the circumstances. "And you will listen because the alternative is incompetence." Kramer took a half-step forward, and for a moment I thought he might attempt to arrest Wolf as a public service. Then he saw Wolf's expression and decided the paperwork would be unbearable. "All right," Kramer growled. "Talk fast." Wolf gestured toward the body without looking away from Kramer. "Observe the orchid petal on the victim's sleeve." Kramer's eyes flicked down. "I see it." Wolf's voice stayed calm. "Do you see how it is attached?" Kramer frowned and stepped closer. Careful now, instinctively aware that a stage detail is often more important than a dramatic one. He leaned, squinted. The petal was not simply resting. It was held, pressed flat, and there, barely visible against the fabric, was a small pin, the kind used on lapel flowers and charity ribbons. It had been pushed through the petal and into the sleeve. Kramer straightened sharply. "Pinned." "Yes," Wolf said. "Pinned deliberately, not fallen naturally." Kramer's mouth tightened. So the petal didn't drift onto him. Wolf's eyes were cold. "Number it was placed. It is theater again." Kramer turned his glare toward the 3 men. "Which one of you did that?" Dyer's face was pale now. Ross was rigid, jaw clenched. Santos looked like he might vomit. Wolf's voice stayed calm. "Inspector, the placement indicates staging, not accident. The killer wants the orchid petal to be the story, to connect the murder to my house and to my orchids, and thereby to me." Kramer's face reddened. "I don't care what story he wants. I care who pulled the trigger." Wolf nodded slightly. "Yes, and to discover that, you must abandon the story offered to you." Kramer muttered something and looked at Durkin. "You see anybody?" Durkin shook his head, face tight. "Shot came from the stairwell angle. Shooter was below, gone fast." Kramer swore. "Of course." Wolf's gaze shifted to Santos. "Mr. Santos, Santos flinched. I didn't shoot him. Wolf's voice was mild. I did not ask if you did. I asked you to speak. Santos's eyes darted. I don't know nothing. Wolf regarded him. You have already carried evidence from my orchid room on your boot. You have been paid in envelopes. You have been frightened. You will now choose which of those facts will be added to a murder charge by your silence. Santos swallowed hard. His gaze flicked toward Ross. Ross's voice snapped too loud. Shut up, Eddie! That was enough. The fear moved. Santos's shoulders hunched, and the dam broke, the way dams break, not with a gentle leak, but with sudden surrender. All right, Santos blurted. All right, I did it. I went in the orchid room. Kramer's head snapped toward him. You went in. Santos nodded frantically. Yeah, I did. Not tonight before, twice. Wolf's eyes narrowed. Explain. Santos's voice shook. Ross paid me. He said it was easy. He said the house was routine. He said I just had to get in, take pictures, and get out. He said those pictures were leverage. Kramer barked. Leverage on who? Santos's face twisted. On inspectors, on anyone, he said. If they saw someone in Wolf's orchid room, they'd shut up because nobody wants to be the guy who broke into Nero Wolf's orchids. Wolf's expression did not change. His eyes only hardened. Kramer turned on Ross. You paid him. Ross's jaw clenched. He's lying. Santos shook his head violently. I'm not. You did. You gave me the key. I felt the air tighten. Key, I said. Santos nodded. Yeah, not the front, the back, basement. There's a key, you said, matched a delivery guy's, you said. Fritz wouldn't notice if I came in when the kitchen was noisy. Wolf's eyes went icy. Fritz had sworn no stranger entered. Fritz had been right, in his own terms. The intruder had not been a stranger. The intruder had entered through a door Fritz did not see, using a key he did not know had been duplicated. Kramer's face darkened. Ross, you're going downtown. Ross's mouth tightened. This is insane. I run a warehouse. Wolf's voice cut in, calm and lethal. You run something else, Mr. Ross. Extra crates. Ross's eyes flicked, and for the first time his composure cracked. It was small, a twitch at the corner of his mouth, but it was enough. Wolf turned his gaze to Dyer. Mr. Dyer. Dyer's face was white, sweat shining at his hairline. Mr. Wolf, I had nothing to do with this shooting. Wolf's voice stayed mild. Perhaps not, but you have everything to do with the shipments. Dyer swallowed. I'm a broker. I arrange freight. Wolf nodded. Yes, and you arrange it to vanish. You were paid in cash after each extra crate. Your bank deposits reflect that. Kramer's eyes narrowed. You have his bank deposits? Wolf did not bother to answer. Kramer already knew how Saul works. Wolf continued, gaze fixed on Dyer. You entered this house tonight because you believed the orchid room was a safe stage. You believed the pedal would continue to direct suspicion toward me while you conducted business. Dyer's mouth opened. That's not. Wolf raised a hand. Listen. He turned his head slightly toward the dead man. An investor is brought here, Wolf said. He watches too closely, he dies. An orchid petal is pinned to his sleeve to emphasize the narrative. Tell me, Mr. Dyer, who benefits from an orchid room intruder and a dead investor. Dyer swallowed, eyes darting. Wolf's voice remained calm. Not the dead man, not the inspector, not me. He turned slightly toward Ross, then back to Dyer. The only man who benefits, Wolf said, is the man hiding what was in those extra crates. Dyer's eyes widened, then narrowed, his lips trembled. Dyer's shoulders sagged as if he had just discovered gravity. He was supposed to buy, Dyer said. He was supposed to put money into the movement. Ross said we needed capital. He said he had a buyer lined up, a clean investor with connections. Ross barked, Shut up. Kramer stepped toward Ross. One more word and I'll tape your mouth. Dyer kept going, because once a man starts confessing, Stopping feels worse than continuing. The extra crates, Dyer said, voice breaking. They weren't orchids, they were art antique stuff, museum pieces, stuff that was supposed to be in private collections. Ross said he could move it through the warehouse in plain sight because inspectors only look for what they understand. Wolf's eyes narrowed. Contraband. Dyer nodded desperately. Yes, and Hale tracked it. He wrote it down. Ross got scared. I got scared. Everyone got scared. I said, so you killed Hale. Dyer's face twisted. Number I didn't. Ross did, or his guy. I just arranged movement. Wolf's gaze was cold. Movement includes bodies. Dyer flinched. Kramer's face was red now, not from cold, but from the satisfaction of a case finally showing a spine. Ross, Kramer growled, you're finished. Ross's jaw clenched hard enough to crack teeth. He stared at Wolf with hatred and something like panic. You think you're clever, Ross said. Wolf's voice stayed calm. I am. Ross's eyes flicked toward the door, toward the hall, toward the stairs, toward escape. Durkin shifted slightly, and the shift said, do not. Ross's shoulders rose, then fell. Kramer snapped cuffs onto Ross with a harsh click, and the sound was satisfying in a primitive way, but Wolf's eyes remained on Dyer. Mr. Dyer, Wolf said, you have not answered the essential question. Who pulled the trigger tonight? Dyer's face crumpled. I don't know. I swear. Wolf's eyes narrowed. Then you will learn, because the shooter had access to my house and my orchids and my narrative. He glanced at Santos. Mr. Santos. Santos's face was wet with sweat. Yeah? Wolf's voice stayed calm. Who else used the key? Santos swallowed. Just me, Ross said, only me. Wolf's eyes went colder. Then the shooter did not use the key. He used the house. I felt my stomach tighten. The other path was not only a door, it was a person, a familiar face. Someone who could stand in the hall, lift a gun, and vanish downstairs without being challenged. And Wolf, sitting in his chair in the middle of the chaos,
looked as calm as a volcano that has decided it will not erupt until it has chosen exactly where to place the lava. He said quietly. Inspector, you wanted cuffs before explanations. You now have one pair of cuffs. You will need more. Kramer growled. You got that right, and I looked at the pinned petal on Pell's sleeve and thought that someone was still pruning the garden. Only now, the pruning had become loud enough for everyone to notice the missing shape. Chapter 10 Wolf insists on endings, the way Fritz insists on clean knives. If the blade is dirty, the cut is sloppy. If the logic is sloppy, the case is unfinished. Wolf will tolerate neither. By midnight, the orchids had been inspected by police flashlights, which is a blasphemy Wolf accepted only because a man had bled on his floor. Martin Pell's body had been removed with the stiff care men use when they are afraid of causing more trouble. The benches had been photographed, the petal pinned to Pell's sleeve bagged as evidence, and the stairwell measured and cursed at until Kramer's men were hoarse. Ross was downstairs, cuffed, sweating, and glaring at the walls as if they had betrayed him. Santos was upstairs, guarded, talking in bursts and sobs and apologies. Kent Dyer sat in Wolf's office with the posture of a man who has learned that charm is useless against proof, and Inspector Kramer, red-faced and furious, had taken the yellow chair by my desk and was looking at Wolf as if Wolf were personally responsible for the existence of crime. Wolf sat behind his desk, composed, enormous, and calm. He had changed into a clean suit because Wolf will not reason in wrinkled cloth if he can avoid it. His face was steady, but his eyes had the hard shine they get when someone has dirtied what he loves. He began without preface. Inspector, Wolf said, you now have 2 homicides and a warehouse conspiracy. You have been offered distractions. I will provide structure. Kramer growled. I don't need structure. I need a confession. Wolf regarded him. Confessions are unreliable. Structure is not. He shifted his gaze to Ross, who was seated under guard near the door, wrists cuffed, jaw clenched. Ross, Wolf said, "Warehouse manager, you used your position to move contraband under the cover of ordinary freight. You called them extra crates." Ross's eyes flashed. "You don't know what you're talking about." Wolf's voice was mild. "I know precisely what I am talking about." He turned slightly toward Dyer. "Kent Dyer, you brokered the shipments. You arranged routes, paperwork, and the disappearance of records. For this you were paid in cash deposited in neat stacks after each successful movement." Dyer's face crumpled. "I didn't kill anyone." Wolf nodded. "That is correct. You preferred to keep your hands tidy. Your hands were tidy, your conscience was not." Dyer flinched. Wolf continued, gaze shifting to Santos. "Eddie Santos, you supplied access. You entered my house through a duplicated key to the basement entrance. You photographed my orchid room as a backdrop for blackmail. You were paid for your stupidity." Santos swallowed, eyes wet. "I didn't know it would get like this." Wolf's tone stayed flat. "Men never know that their cowardice will have consequences until it does." Wolf then turned his gaze to the empty chair where Martin Pell would have sat if he had lived long enough to regret his investments. "And Martin Pell," Wolf said. "The money man, the capital. He watched too closely because he was not merely buying freight. He was buying safety. He believed he could invest in contraband and remain clean." Kramer's jaw tightened. "He didn't." Wolf nodded. "Number." He leaned forward slightly, hands folded. "Now the pivot." "Grant Hale," I said. "Hale kept the black notebook." Wolf nodded. "Yes. Hale was not merely a foreman. He was a man who counted. He recorded late-night movements. That notebook was the threat that could end Mr. Ross." Ross's face twisted. Hale was a thief. Wolf's eyes narrowed. "Perhaps. But thieves often keep records when they intend to sell their silence." Hale began to understand the value of truth. Kramer snorted. "Truth." He was probably trying to shake them down. Wolf nodded. "Exactly. He attempted to sell truth instead of silence." He turned his gaze to Dyer. "Mr. Dyer, Hale demanded money." Dyer's mouth tightened. He did not deny it. Wolf said, "He believed his notebook was insurance. In fact, it was his death warrant." Ross leaned forward slightly, cuffed wrists pulling at the chain. "You can't prove I killed him." Wolf's eyes were cold. "You killed him because he would not remain frightened." Ross's mouth tightened. Wolf continued, voice calm, laying it out as if reading from a ledger. "You arranged the first intrusion into my orchid room as leverage," Wolf said. "You wished to demonstrate access to what I value, and to create a backdrop for blackmail photographs. Those photographs were used to coerce Mr. Quay into negligence, and to silence others who might observe your extra crates." Kramer muttered, "That's motive and method." Wolf nodded. "Yes. Then Hale kept his notebook. When he attempted to use it, you murdered him downtown and placed an orchid petal on his lapel. A petal from my rare green bloom. This was not sentimental. It was deliberate. You wished to connect the corpse to my house, to make police attention orbit me rather than your warehouse." Ross sneered. "You're guessing." Wolf's gaze remained steady. "Number, I am observing your pattern. You clean too fast. You stage too carefully, and you cannot resist signing." Ross stiffened. Wolf went on. "When the notebook vanished, you believed you had removed the threat. But a torn page appeared near my block. That page revealed the extra crates moved on inspection nights. The structure was exposed. You were forced to accelerate." Dyer's voice cracked. Ross panicked. Wolf nodded. "Yes, panic makes men sloppy." He looked briefly at the orchid petal evidence envelope on my desk. "You then attended my announced viewing because you believed you could control the narrative on my ground. You brought Mr. Pell because you needed money and because you wished to reassure him. Instead, his presence became a liability." He watched too closely. Kramer's eyes narrowed. "So Ross killed him too." Wolf's eyes went colder. Yes, Mr. Ross arranged Mr. Pell's death to erase the trail and to prevent an investor from becoming a witness. And again he planted an orchid petal, pinned deliberately, to frame my house as the odd culprit and to distract the police. Ross barked a laugh. I was in your orchid room when he got shot. How did I shoot him from the stairwell? Wolf looked at him. You did not shoot him from the stairwell. You arranged for the shot by ensuring you had a weapon, a line of fire, and a moment of distraction. Ross's eyes narrowed. Prove it. Wolf's voice stayed calm. You had access to the house through your employee, Mr. Santos. You were familiar with the stairwell angle because you needed to know how to enter and exit unseen. You placed Mr. Pell where he would fall near the doorway so the petal could be pinned quickly, even in the brief second after the shot. Kramer slammed a palm on my desk. Hold it. You're saying Ross pinned the petal after the shot? Wolf nodded. Yes, the pin was placed too neatly. Not by a fleeing shooter outside the room, by someone inside, who had seconds while everyone froze in shock. Shock is a gift to a man who plans. Ross's face twisted. That's ridiculous. Wolf's eyes were cold. It is practical. And you, Mr. Ross, are a practical man. You arranged a man's death downtown and signed it with a petal. You arranged a man's death in my house. And when the shot did its work from the stairwell, you used the freeze of shock to pin your signature where everyone would see it. You did not do it for poetry. You did it for control. Ross stared at Wolf with hatred that had finally lost its polish. Kramer leaned forward, voice harsh. Ross, where's Hale's notebook? Ross's jaw clenched. Wolf answered for him, voice calm, destroyed or concealed. But it is no longer necessary. Mr. Dyer's deposits, Mr. Quay's testimony, the extra crate pattern, and Mr. Santos's confession established the conspiracy. The homicides provide motive and urgency. Kramer swore under his breath, then stood. All right, that's enough. He nodded to his men. Take Ross. Ross surged up, cuff chain clinking, face ugly. This is all because of flowers. Wolf's eyes narrowed. Number it is because of greed. The flowers were only your signature. Ross tried to lunge, but two detectives grabbed him and hauled him out. His boots thudded down the stairs, the sound fading into the front hall like a storm moving away. Kramer turned on Dyer. You're coming too? Dyer's shoulders sagged. I'll cooperate, Kramer grunted. You'd better. When the office finally emptied, when the police had taken their bodies and their suspects and their noise, the brownstone went still in the way it always does after violence, as if the walls are tired. Fritz appeared quietly, face tight with worry. He looked at Wolf. Sir, Fritz said softly, the orchid room. Wolf's gaze lifted, and for a moment I saw something like grief, not for the plants, but for the violation of order. Then it hardened into determination. He stood. Yes, we went upstairs together, Wolf moving slower now, not from fatigue, but from the careful weight of a man inspecting a wound. In the orchid room, the benches were still aligned, but the space felt wrong, not because anything had been stolen, but because trust had been. Wolf walked to the green bloom and stood before it. The pale petals glowed softly under the lights, innocent in the face of what men had done around it. Wolf said quietly, they used you as a lie. I did not make a joke. There are moments when even I know better. Wolf turned and walked to the door. He closed it, turned the key, and then tested it twice, as if daring reality to defy him again. Fritz watched, hands clasped, eyes troubled. Sir, how did they enter? Wolf's voice was flat, through complacency. He looked at me, and through a man who could not resist signing his work. I raised an eyebrow. The petal. Wolf nodded. The surest intruder leaves no trace. That is competence. But competence is not enough. Pride insists on a signature. That is vanity. Vanity is how we caught him. We went back downstairs. Wolf returned to his chair. Fritz went to the kitchen, because even offended order requires supper. I sat at my desk, staring at the winter light outside the window. New York looked the same as always. Cars, people, cold air, indifference. But I had learned something new, and it was not about orchids. The surest intruder leaves no trace until he cannot resist making the trace mean something. And when a man cannot resist signing his work, it does not matter how carefully he cleaned the room. Eventually, the signature becomes the only thing left.